My name is Calvin. I've been driving long-haul and regional freight for going on 23 years. Before that, I worked dispatch. Before that, I loaded pallets at a distribution center in Tulsa. I'm not a romantic or a spiritual person. I don't go to church. I don't watch horror movies because I find them boring, not because they frighten me. My ex-wife used to say I had the emotional range of a parking meter. She wasn't entirely wrong. I found this podcast through a colleague, another driver named Darnell, who hauls refrigerated goods out of a depot near mine. He'd been listening for months and said, "Calvin, man, you need to tell your story somewhere people will actually hear it." So here I am. A little background, because context matters for this kind of thing. Until 2020, I ran my own small operation. 2 trucks, a couple of part-time guys, mostly residential moves, and the occasional commercial job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then COVID hit, and like a lot of small operators, I watched it collapse in slow motion. By late 2020, I'd sold both trucks, let my guys go, and was working for a regional moving company out of Memphis just to keep current on rent. I also went through a divorce that year. We'd been drifting for a long time, and the stress of everything finally finished what was left. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because when you lose that much in a short span of time, you rebuild yourself into someone a little harder, a little less curious, a little more focused on just getting the job done and going home. By the time this happened, I'd clawed most of it back. I had a truck again. Leased, not owned, but still mine to operate. I was doing independent contracts, mostly through referrals, which is how the job in question came to me. A former associate of mine, a man named Terrence, who I'd known since my early dispatch days, reached out about a family that needed a private hauler. He said they'd specifically asked for someone with experience, someone discreet, and someone who didn't talk much. He said the job came with good pay, cash, and that the only condition was that I not ask too many questions. That description alone should have made me walk away. Instead, I said I'd go meet them. The family lived on a property about 40 miles outside of town. The road leading to it wasn't on GPS. You had to follow handwritten directions Terrence had transcribed on a notepad. I remember thinking that was unusual but not unheard of. Rural properties in that part of the state are often poorly mapped. The land itself was flat and dry, scrubland dotted with cedar trees. The house was modest and well kept, not what I'd call isolated so much as deliberately private, the way certain people choose to live when they've had enough of other people. A man met me at the edge of the property. He introduced himself simply as Gerald. He was in his late 40s, lean and weathered, the kind of hands that come from years of physical labor. His wife, standing slightly behind him, gave her name as Miriam. There were 2 kids somewhere in the background, young, maybe 6 or 7, who appeared briefly and then vanished inside the house the way kids do when strangers arrive. I remember they didn't make any noise, no yelling, no laughter. They just looked at me and disappeared. There was also an old man. He was sitting in a wooden chair on the covered porch, and he didn't stand when I approached. He didn't introduce himself. He watched me with the kind of focused attention you usually associate with people who are used to being underestimated. A stillness that wasn't passive but deliberate. He was old in the way that some people are old in the South, where the years stack on a person like sediment, layering into something that looks almost geological. He had a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head, and he was chewing something, though I never saw him spit. His eyes were pale blue, nearly colorless, the kind that seemed to pick up ambient light rather than reflect it. Nobody introduced him, and I didn't ask. Gerald walked me around to a storage shed at the back of the property and explained the job. There were 3 large crates that needed transport to a climate-controlled storage facility in the city, a drive of roughly 2.5 hours. The crates contained items of significant personal and historical value to his family. He told me they'd been in the family for several generations, brought over from Eastern Europe in the early 1900s by a great-great-grandparent fleeing the war. He said the items inside were fragile, irreplaceable, and that under absolutely no circumstances should the crates be opened. I told him I'd heard stranger things. I also told him what I told anyone who came to me with that kind of work. I didn't haul anything illegal. I didn't care what the story was. If I got pulled over and something questionable was in my load, good intentions weren't going to help me. Gerald nodded like he'd expected this. He told me to wait and went inside. When he came back, the old man was with him. He walked slowly but not unsteadily. He came close enough that I could smell him. pipe tobacco and something older underneath it like cedar or dry wood. He looked up at me and said very quietly, "Son, there is nothing in those crates that would interest law enforcement, you have my word on that. But I want you to hear me say it plainly, do not open them, not out of curiosity, not if you hear something, not for any reason. You drive, you deliver, you go home." He held eye contact for a bit longer than was comfortable, then turned and went back to the porch. I said I understood. The crates were large, roughly the dimensions of a wardrobe laid on its side, and heavy in that particular way that suggests density rather than size. We loaded the first two without incident, Gerald and I working in the fading afternoon light. The third was heavier than the others and had been reinforced with iron bolts along the seams of the lid, which I noted but didn't comment on. Once it was loaded, Gerald closed the roll door on my cargo box and told me the address. Before I climbed into the cab, he said, "If you hear anything unusual back there, don't stop. Just keep driving and call us." He handed me a business card with a handwritten number on the back. I took it. I didn't say anything. I started the truck and pulled out. For the first hour, everything was normal. The route took me along a state highway that runs through ranch country. Flat two-lane, occasional oil pump jack silhouetted in the dusk. I had a country station on the radio. I ate a granola bar I'd left on the passenger seat. My mind was on nothing in particular, just the road and the light changing. Then I heard it. It started as something I could almost rationalize. A low rhythmic sound from the cargo box that could have been a loose strap or a piece of the load shifting with the road. I've hauled furniture, equipment, antiques, things move, things settle, that's normal. But it kept going, and it began to change. By the time the sun was fully gone and I was running on headlights, the sound had evolved from a shifting weight to something that had a more deliberate quality. It had a pace to it. 3 slow knocks, a pause, 3 more. I told myself it was nothing. I have been driving for 23 years. I have made that argument to myself exactly twice in my career. Once on a mountain pass in Colorado when weather closed in faster than forecast, and once that night. Both times I was lying to myself and I knew it. I pulled over at a wide gravel shoulder, grabbed my flashlight, and went to check the cargo. The roll door opened cleanly. I swept the interior with the flashlight. The 3 crates were exactly as I'd loaded them. Same positions, same orientations, nothing visibly displaced. I walked the length of the cargo box. I checked behind the crates, between them, under the wheel wells, nothing. No stowaways, no loose cargo, no obvious explanation. I stood there for a moment in the silence, listening. No sound now except wind across the scrubland and something distant. A coyote, probably. Or what I was trying to convince myself was a coyote. I closed the door and got back behind the wheel. 11 minutes later. I know because I looked at the dash clock. It started again. This time it wasn't knocking. It was something that I have spent 18 months trying to accurately describe and still fail at. The closest I can come is this. Imagine you took the sound of someone in distress, crying out, calling for help, and then slowed it down by a factor of about 3 and then put it through a room that was much too large for it. It had the shape of a human voice, but the resonance of something that had never been inside a building. It rose and then it peaked and then it trailed off, and in the trailing off there were syllables. I heard, "Let me." Just those 2 words. Or a sound that resolved into those 2 words the way a figure resolves out of fog. First you're seeing shapes, and then suddenly you're seeing a person. I pulled over again. I want to be honest with you about my mental state at this point. I was not calm. My hands were not steady. I had a very strong desire to call Terrence and tell him the job was off, leave the truck on the shoulder, and arrange a pickup in the morning. But I also had the irrational conviction that I needed to see the inside of that 3rd crate. Not because I was brave, not because I was curious in any healthy sense. It was more like the feeling you get at the edge of a high place. Not a desire to jump, but a strange pull that you can't fully rationalize, like something in the physical world is exerting a claim on your attention. I got out. I went to the back. I opened the door. The 3rd crate had moved. Not dramatically. Maybe 8 or 10 inches closer to the roll door than it had been. The road had been flat and I hadn't taken any turns that would account for that kind of lateral movement. I stared at it. I put my hand on the lid. The iron bolts that reinforced the seams were cold, colder than the ambient temperature of the air around them, which was not a warm night but wasn't cold enough to explain what I was touching. There was also a smell. I don't know how else to describe it except to say that it was organic in a way that felt wrong. Not the straightforward rot of something dead, but something more complicated. Something that suggested a process still in motion. I backed away from it and swept the flashlight across the crate's surface. In the lower right corner of one of the side panels, there was a natural knot in the wood, old enough that it had dried and contracted and pulled partially away from the surrounding grain, leaving a gap about the size of a marble. I should have turned away. I should have closed the roll door and kept driving. Every reasonable instinct I had told me to do exactly that. I crouched down and put my eye to the gap. I don't know what I expected to see. What I saw was darkness, but not empty darkness. It was the kind of darkness that has something in it, a darker shape within dark. And then very slowly the darker shape moved, and I saw light. Two small points of yellowish light close together, roughly where eyes would be if something were lying inside the crate looking out. They didn't blink. I was back at the cab door before I had any conscious recollection of standing up. My heart was doing something medical. I sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel, and I did not move for what I later estimated was about 4 minutes, because I needed to let my hands stop shaking enough to actually drive. I made myself think about something ordinary. The paperwork at the depot, what I was going to eat when I got home, whether I'd remembered to pay the electric bill. Small, real, ordinary things. Then I heard a voice from immediately behind my left ear. "Open it." I will tell you honestly, I screamed. I don't say that with any pride. I screamed the way a person screams when their nervous system completely overrides their dignity. And I yanked the wheel hard enough that the truck drifted half onto the shoulder before I corrected. I checked the mirrors. I looked at the passenger seat. I looked everywhere I could look while keeping the truck on the road. Nothing. Nobody. I drove. I drove the rest of the way without stopping. I found that if I kept the radio at a volume that bordered on painful and focused on the center line, I could maintain something close to functional. I called the number on the business card and left a voicemail saying I was an hour out and everything was fine, because I was not going to tell anyone anything about what I'd seen or heard until I was in a well-lit place with other people present. The storage facility was in an industrial district near a rail yard. When I pulled in, there was already a man there waiting, stocky, grey jacket, cigarette. He introduced himself as Gary and said he was a cousin of Gerald's. He looked enough like Gerald that I believed him. He was calm and efficient and watched me with the particular attention of someone who is deciding whether to trust a person or not. "Any problems on the way?" he asked, looking at me rather than the truck. "Road was fine," I said. "Little slower going than I expected." He nodded. We opened the cargo box together. The 3 crates were there, in position. The 3rd crate was back where it had been when I loaded it. Maybe 8 or 10 inches further from the door than where I'd seen it when I'd last checked. The seams were intact. The iron bolts were in place. There was no smell that I could detect. Though the air in the box had a quality to it I can't fully name, the way a room smells when it's been occupied and then emptied quickly. We unloaded together. When we slid the 3rd crate out, I noticed the underside had a dark stain on it. Wet, tacky. I stepped over it. When Gary had gone inside with a handcart, I took my flashlight and looked at the floor of the cargo box. There was a smear about 2 feet long, dark in color, the consistency of something that had thickened in the cold. I cleaned it. I did not ask questions. I did not tell Gary what I'd seen or what I'd heard or what I'd smelled. He came back out, counted out my payment in cash, and told me to drive safe. I thanked him and left. 2 miles away, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station and sat in the truck for a long time. I've never been contacted by that family again. Terence says he lost touch with Gerald not long after, which he found unusual but didn't elaborate on. I've thought about those crates many times. I've thought about what might have been in them. Not any specific theory, just the general fact of not knowing, and how that fact has a weight to it that doesn't diminish. A few months after it happened, I told the story to an older driver I know, a man who has spent decades hauling freight across the South and the Southwest, who has his own catalogue of strange experiences. He's not a credulous person. He listened without interrupting, which is unusual for him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The bird." I hadn't told him about the bird. I'd gotten so focused on the crate that I'd almost forgotten to mention that at a certain point, when I'd been pulled over the second time, there had been a large dark bird sitting in a mesquite tree not 20 feet from the cargo box. A big bird, bigger than a crow, too still for the wind to explain. It had looked at me. That's the only way I can put it. Not the generalized awareness of a bird that notices something moving near it. It looked at me the way a person looks at something they've been waiting to see. My friend nodded when I described it. Some families, he said, have a way of keeping an eye on things. He didn't say more and I didn't push him. I've thought about what he meant. I've thought about the old man on the porch with the colorless eyes and the tobacco smell and the way he looked at me like he was taking my measure. I don't have a theory and I'm not offering you one. What I have is this. Whatever was in those crates, it arrived at its destination. Whatever was watching to make sure it arrived intact, it was satisfied, and I came home. I tell this story because Darnell was right. It needed somewhere to go. Carrying it alone is its own kind of weight. If any of you have heard something like this, or know what I might have been transporting that night, I'd genuinely like to know. Not to revisit it, not to chase it, just to finally put a name to the thing and then close the door on it for good. Drive safe. Good evening. My name is Nathaniel, and what I'm about to tell you is something I have kept to myself for a long time. I am not a superstitious man. I was raised in a household that valued discipline, reason, and evidence. Feelings were not evidence. Shadows in the dark were not evidence, and yet here I am, nearly 2 years after the events I am about to describe, still unable to sleep through the night without waking to the sound of footsteps that are not there. I served in the United States Army for over 22 years. I will not say which base or which division because some of what I witnessed falls under the kind of gray area that could land me in a very uncomfortable conversation with people who carry considerably more rank than I do. What I will say is that for the last 8 years of my career, I worked as an instructor at a military training academy in the South. I taught applied physics and field mathematics to cadets, the kind of dry technical material that most of them hated. It was a good life, if not a glamorous one. The academy had its legends, as all old military installations do. There was the story of the mechanic who had been crushed under an armored vehicle sometime in the 1950s and whose figure was supposedly seen walking through the motor pool after midnight. There was the tale of a female officer who had hanged herself in one of the Eastern Barracks buildings during the 90s, apparently after a string of harassment that was swept under the institutional rug. Old buildings keep old grief. That is simply the nature of things. I'd heard these stories 100 times over the years and paid them no particular mind. What happened with Cadet Marcus Elroy, however, was something I cannot explain away. Even now, writing this down, I feel a tightness in my chest that I can only describe as the sensation of being watched. Marcus came to us at 19 years old, a quiet kid from rural Georgia whose father had served 2 tours in Iraq before dying of a stroke at 51. The boy had made a promise at his father's grave. He would finish what his father started. He would earn his commission. I heard this story indirectly through the casual gossip that circulates in any enclosed institution, and I held a certain respect for it without letting that respect compromise my professional judgment. The problem was that Marcus was not suited for the environment, at least not on the surface. He was slow to react under pressure. His physical scores were consistently below average. He had a habit of over-explaining himself when answering questions, which his peers found irritating and his superior officers found unacceptable. He was not unintelligent. I could see that clearly in the written work he submitted to me. There was genuine thought there, careful reasoning, a mind that worked methodically if given enough time. But the academy did not reward methodical. It rewarded fast, decisive, and loud. His fellow cadets gave him no mercy. I saw it in the mess hall, in the training yard, in the way conversations died when he walked into a room. There was a particular group of 3 cadets, led by a young man I will call Sergeant Candidate Holt, who seemed to have appointed themselves as Marcus's personal tormentors. I reported their behavior on 2 separate occasions and was told both times that the friction was normal and that it would either strengthen Marcus or weed him out. That was the philosophy of the place. I tried once to speak with Marcus privately, I called him into my office on a Tuesday afternoon and told him, as gently as I could, that there was no shame in recognizing when a path was wrong for you, that his father's wish for him was surely a happy life, not an unhappy one. Marcus looked at me with those careful, unhurried eyes of his and said, "Respectfully, sir, I made a promise. A man who breaks his promises to the dead has nothing left." I did not argue with him. I should have tried harder. That is something I will carry for the rest of my life. The accident happened on a Thursday morning in late October. The cadets were running a rope traverse over one of the creek beds at the edge of the training grounds, a standard exercise. Marcus was roughly 2/3 of the way across when the primary anchor gave way. He fell about 14 feet, struck the rocky bank below, and did not move. He was airlifted to a hospital in the city. The diagnosis was a severe concussion, a fractured collarbone, 2 cracked ribs, and what the doctors described as significant neurological bruising. He was unconscious for 4 days. The investigation into the anchor failure was quiet and quick. I pushed for a more thorough inquiry. What I eventually pieced together, through conversations with 2 cadets who came to me separately and asked to remain anonymous, was that Holt and his associates had deliberately compromised the rigging. They had done it casually, almost as a joke, the way mean people convince themselves that cruelty is humor. One of the anonymous cadets told me with visible shame that Holt had said he just wanted to give Elroy a scare. I brought my findings to the review board. Holt and 2 others were expelled within the week. The speed of it surprised me. Usually these things drag on for months. I think the administration wanted it buried quickly. 6 weeks later, Marcus Elroy walked back through the gate. I did not recognize him at first, that is the honest truth. He had lost weight but gained something else in his bearing. A stillness that had not been there before. He moved differently. Not with arrogance, but with a kind of quiet certainty that I had never associated with him. He reported to my classroom on his first day back, and during a session on trajectory calculations that had stumped most of the class for 2 weeks, he solved the primary problem in 11 minutes and then quietly explained his method to the cadet sitting next to him. I stayed behind after class and asked him directly, "Marcus, what happened to you in that hospital?" He considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I'm not entirely sure how to say this, sir. When I was unconscious, I wasn't nowhere. There were people with me, a lot of them. They didn't have faces I could make out, but I could feel that they meant well. They showed me things, explained things I had never understood. I felt like I was being repaired, I suppose. When I woke up, I still had most of it, and then over the next few days I lost some of it, but not all." "What kind of things did they show you?" He shook his head slowly. "Most of it I can't put into words, sir. It was more like understanding than information, like knowing how to ride a bicycle versus reading about it." I told him to get some rest and that I was glad he was back. I meant both of those things. But I was also unsettled in a way I could not articulate. There are people who change after near-death experiences. Science has documented this. I told myself that was all it was. The change that disturbed me was not the improvement in his academic performance nor the physical transformation. It was what came after. Approximately 3 weeks after his return, his bunkmates began reporting things. First it was the talking in his sleep, and not murmuring, but full sentences spoken clearly, as if he were in the middle of a deliberate conversation. One cadet said it sounded like Marcus was taking instructions from someone. Then there was the sleepwalking. A cadet named Patterson told me that he woke one night to find Marcus standing at the foot of his own bunk, perfectly upright, eyes open, moving his lips without sound. Patterson said he tapped Marcus on the shoulder, and Marcus snapped awake like a light being switched on, then sat down on the floor and pressed his hands against his face. "They won't stop," Marcus said. "They keep telling me things I don't want to know." I went to the base physician, a practical woman named Dr. Caswell. She reviewed Marcus's medical records and told me that there had been a secondary complication during his hospitalization. A brief period of cardiac irregularity on the 3rd night, during which his brain had been deprived of adequate oxygen for somewhere between 2 and 4 minutes. She was careful with her language. She said this could account for personality changes and unusual sleep behavior. She recommended psychiatric evaluation. I agreed. The evaluation was inconclusive. The psychiatrist noted that Marcus was lucid, coherent, and showed no signs of psychosis in the clinical sense. What he did show, according to the report, was an unusual preoccupation with external voices guiding his behavior, which the psychiatrist flagged as something to monitor. What the psychiatric report did not capture was what I witnessed on the night of November 14th. I was working late in the administrative building, the kind of paperwork that always seems to multiply after any kind of institutional incident. It was just past 11 when I walked out toward the parking lot and saw a light moving at the far edge of the training field, near the old storage buildings at the tree line. It was too steady to be a flashlight and the wrong color for a standard issue lamp. A pale bluish white, slightly diffuse. I assumed it was equipment failure of some kind and walked toward it. As I got closer, I saw Marcus. He was standing at the tree line, not moving, facing the woods. The light was not equipment failure, it was hovering just above his right shoulder, slightly behind him, pulsing very slowly. As I watched, it drifted a few feet into the trees, and Marcus took a step to follow it. I called out his name. He stopped. The light vanished. He turned around slowly and looked at me without surprise, as though he had known I was there. "Sir, what are you doing out here at 11 o'clock at night?" "Running, sir, I was told to." "Told to by whom?" He hesitated. "The ones who helped me. They want me ready." I told him to return to his bunk. I watched him walk back across the field. When I looked back at the tree line, the light was there again briefly, and then it was not. I went home that night and sat in my kitchen for a long time with a glass of water I never drank. I brought my concerns to the review board 2 days later. I laid out everything in a measured, factual way because that is the only language these bodies respond to. Marcus Elroy, I argued, was displaying behavior that constituted a safety risk to himself and to the cadets around him. I cited the sleepwalking, the reported speech during sleep, the unauthorized nighttime activity, the witness testimony from Patterson and 2 others. One of the board members asked me if I believed the cadet posed an active threat. I said that I did not know, but that the question of active threat was not the only criterion that mattered in an institution responsible for training young people in the use of lethal weapons. They voted to separate Marcus from the program on medical grounds. The decision was recorded, the paperwork was processed. Marcus was given 2 days to pack his belongings. On the morning of his departure, he came to find me. He stood in the doorway of my office with his duffel bag over one shoulder and looked at me for a long moment. "I know why you did it, sir," he said. "I'm not angry." "Where will you go?" I asked him. "Home, I think, for a while." He paused. "One of them told me something last night about Cadet Reeves." He was referring to the highest performing cadet in his cohort, a young man from Tennessee who had been something of a golden boy in the program. "He should be careful on the highway, specifically the overpass on Route 11. I know how that sounds. I'm just passing it on because I was asked to." I said nothing. Marcus nodded once, turned, and walked out of my sight. I will not drag out the ending. After Marcus left, there were sightings. Several cadets reported seeing him near the motor pool at dusk. One of the overnight guards insisted he had seen a figure lying in Marcus's old bunk on 2 separate nights, gone by the time the light was turned on. I tried to locate Marcus through the contact information we had on file, but the phone number was disconnected and letters to his listed address went unanswered. 7 weeks after his discharge, I received a call from an administrator in the county where Marcus had grown up. He had been found in a rented room above a hardware store. The official determination was suicide, though the administrator's voice carried a note of unease that she did not put into words. I thanked her and hung up the phone and sat for a while without moving. The landlord called me a week later. She had found my number in Marcus's things. She was an older woman, plain-spoken, not given to drama. She told me that in the last days of his life, Marcus had barely left his room, that she had heard him talking through the wall at night. Full conversations, both sides of them, as if he were 2 people. She said on the last morning she saw him alive, he had come down for coffee and told her that the voices had stopped. He said it like it was a bad thing, she told me, like the quiet was worse than the noise. Then he went back upstairs and that was the last I saw of him. Cadet Reeves was killed 4 months later. He and his girlfriend were driving home from a party on a Saturday night. On the overpass of Route 11, a trailer truck crossed the center line. His car was destroyed on impact. His girlfriend survived. He did not. I have thought about whether I should have told him, whether those words Marcus left me with constituted a warning I was obligated to pass on, or the confused utterance of a profoundly disturbed young man that would have served only to frighten someone unnecessarily. I made the decision I made. I cannot revisit it now. What I can say is this: I do not believe in ghosts, not in the Hollywood sense of the word. But I have come to believe in the years since that the line between the living and the dead is considerably less clean than I was taught. I have come to believe that sometimes that line gets thin in a specific place, at a specific time, in the body of a person who has been close enough to the other side that something followed them back. Whether those things are benevolent or not, I cannot say with confidence. What happened to Marcus suggests that being chosen is not the same as being fortunate. He still had promises to keep. And whatever found him in that hospital, whatever used him as a vessel or a messenger or a student, did not care about promises. He visits a tree line sometimes, the guards say, usually just before dawn. A figure standing at the edge of the wood, looking back at the lights of the academy. I believe them. I have stopped going to look. Good evening, Mr. Williams. I was told you collect these kinds of accounts. The ones that don't fit neatly into any report, the ones that get filed under inconclusive and never spoken of again. I've been sitting on this story for almost 20 years. My wife says I need to get it out of my head. My therapist says the same thing, though she phrases it differently. So here it is. I'll tell it the way it happened without embellishment, and you can do with it whatever you see fit. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that in 2004, I was a sergeant first class with the 75th Ranger Regiment, based out of Fort Benning, Georgia. I had done 2 tours in Afghanistan after 9/11 and was considered by most accounts an experienced and level-headed soldier. I don't say this to brag. I say it because I want you to understand the kind of man I was when these events occurred, and the kind of man I became afterward. In early October of 2004, our unit was temporarily reassigned to assist a joint DEA and U.S. Southern Command operation in the interior of Colombia, near the border of the Putumayo and Caqueta departments. This was a sensitive assignment. We weren't officially there, at least not on paper. Plan Colombia was in full swing, and while the public narrative was about crop eradication and counter-narcotics training, the reality on the ground was far more complicated. There were factions within factions. FARC controlled large swaths of jungle. Paramilitary groups operated with something resembling official tolerance. And somewhere in the middle of all that, we were supposed to locate and neutralize a processing facility believed to be producing over 4 metric tons of cocaine per month. Our team consisted of 8 men. I was second in command under Captain Reyes, a Venezuelan-American officer who spoke fluent Spanish and had grown up near Medellin. He knew the country better than any of us and was the kind of leader you'd follow into hell without thinking twice. The other 6 were a mix of Rangers and Special Forces personnel on temporary assignment. Good men, every one of them. We were inserted by helicopter approximately 40 kilometers from the target facility in dense primary jungle. The plan was to move on foot, reach a forward observation point by day 2, gather intelligence for 48 hours, and then either call in a strike or move in for a direct action raid, depending on what we found. The first 2 days were uneventful, hot, punishing, relentless. The jungle made sure you never forgot where you were, but uneventful. We moved slowly, maintained noise discipline, and rotated watch shifts through the nights. The jungle at night in that part of Colombia is like nothing I can properly describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. The sound is constant and overwhelming. Insects, frogs, bats, the occasional distant howl of something large moving through the canopy. You learn eventually to filter it. You learn which sounds belong there and which don't. On the 3rd day, we located the observation point, a ridge overlooking a wide river bend, and set up our position. Through the spotting scope, we could see activity on the opposite bank, structures partially hidden by jungle cover, armed guards moving in loose patrol patterns, the occasional rumble of a generator. We were in the right place. It was during the 2nd night at the observation point that things began to change. Private First Class Darnell, I'll call him that, though it wasn't his real name, was on the 3rd watch rotation between 2 and 4 in the morning. He woke me at approximately 2:40 a.m. He didn't shake my shoulder like you normally would. He gripped my arm and held it hard without saying a word. That's how I knew something was wrong before I even opened my eyes. "Sergeant, you need to see this. You need to come right now." His voice was flat, not frightened exactly. More like a man who has moved past fear into something quieter and more disturbing. I've heard that tone before in men who've seen friends killed in front of them. It's the voice of someone whose nervous system has hit a ceiling it didn't know existed. I followed him to the forward edge of the ridge. He handed me the night vision scope without a word. Down by the river's edge, on our side of the bank, maybe 200 meters below us, there was a figure standing in the water. I want to be precise about what I saw, because I have gone over it thousands of times in my memory and I don't want to exaggerate it. The figure appeared to be a man. It was standing roughly waist deep in the slow-moving current. It was not moving. It was facing upstream away from us, completely still. Given the temperature of the water and the hour of night, this was strange enough. But what kept me fixed on the scope for a long time was the size of it. It was tall, not impossibly so. Not the kind of tall you'd see in a horror movie, but tall in a way that registered as wrong when set against the trees and the bank behind it. 7 feet perhaps a little more. Its proportions were off in a way I couldn't immediately identify. The arms were slightly too long, the shoulders were slightly too wide. These are the kinds of details you don't consciously notice in the moment. You just feel the wrongness before you can name it. I watched it for 4 minutes. It did not move once. I woke Captain Reyes. He looked through the scope for 2 minutes, handed it back to me and said quietly, "Don't put that in the log. I mean it. Don't write it down." I didn't ask him why. At that hour, in that place, the instruction made a certain sense I couldn't articulate. We woke the rest of the team silently and repositioned slightly back from the ridge edge. No one spoke for a long time. When dawn came, there was nothing in the river. We spent the following day focused on the target facility across the water. Patrol patterns, guard changes, vehicle movements. We did our job, but I noticed that no one discussed what we had seen the night before, and no one ventured to the forward edge of the ridge alone. These were men trained to operate in hostile environments without complaint. The unspoken consensus to avoid that particular strip of riverbank said more than any debriefing could have. On the 5th night, Sergeant Okafor, our communications specialist, a quiet and extremely professional man from Houston who had a habit of reading during rest periods, took the 0100 watch. At approximately 0230, I was awakened again, this time not by Okafor, but by the sound. It began as something I processed, half asleep, as a voice. Not words. Or if they were words, they were in no language I recognized. A low rhythmic vocalization that rose and fell with a cadence that felt almost deliberate, almost structured, like a song, like something being recited. I sat up. The rest of the team was awake as well. No one had to wake anyone. The sound had done it by itself. It was coming from below the ridge, from the river. Okafor was at the forward edge, lying prone, scope to his eye. I crawled up beside him. "It's been going on for about 6 minutes," he said without lowering the scope. "It's in the water again, same spot. But now there's more than one." I took the scope. There were 3 of them this time, same general form as the first figure. Tall, still proportioned in that way that the eye rejected without being able to explain why. 2 were standing in the river as before. The 3rd was at the water's edge, crouching with its back to the current and its face, or what should have been its face, tilted upward toward the ridge. Toward us. I lowered the scope. My hands were steady. I was aware of that, the way you sometimes become aware of your own body's reactions from a slight remove as though observing them from a short distance. My hands were steady, but my chest had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the night air. "Does it know we're here?" I asked. "I don't think it matters," Okafor said. He paused. "That's the feeling I get, that it doesn't particularly matter whether it knows or not." Captain Reyes made the call to withdraw. Not tactically. There was no tactical justification for pulling back from an observation point we'd spent 5 days reaching, but he made the call, and none of us argued with it. We broke down the position quickly and quietly, and moved back along the ridge in the dark, putting distance between ourselves and that stretch of river. We made camp 2 kilometers back on higher ground, in a dense grove of cecropia trees. No one slept. By the time the sky began to lighten in the east, We had 8 men sitting in a rough circle in the undergrowth, most of them with 10 or more years of combined military experience between them, not speaking. Captain Reyes eventually said, "I'm going to say this once and then I don't want to hear it mentioned again after we're on the helicopter, whatever that was. It is not in the mission, it is not our objective. We don't talk about it on comms, we don't write it up, and when we get home it didn't happen. Are we clear?" We were clear. We re-established the observation post the following morning from a slightly different angle and completed the intelligence phase of the mission without further incident. The airstrike was called in 4 days later. The facility was destroyed. By any measurable standard, the operation was a success. But I need to tell you about Darnell. In the weeks following our return to Benning, Darnell began to change in ways that were subtle at first and then not subtle at all. He stopped sleeping. Not the insomnia of a man with combat trauma. I've seen enough of that to know the shape of it. This was different. He would be found in the barracks at 0300, fully dressed, sitting upright on his bunk, staring at the wall across the room. When asked about it, he would say he didn't want to close his eyes, that when he closed his eyes he could hear the sound. He told me in one of the last conversations I had with him before he was transferred to Walter Reed, that what bothered him most wasn't what he had seen in the river. It was something he hadn't told anyone, something he'd held back even during my conversations with him in the jungle. On the night of the first sighting, the night he had woken me, he had been watching the figure in the river for nearly 15 minutes before he came to get me. During those 15 minutes, he said, he had the overwhelming sensation that the figure was aware of him, not looking at him. It never turned around, but aware. The way you sometimes know without seeing, that someone in a crowded room has their attention fixed on you. And then he said something that I've thought about almost every day since. He said, "It wasn't threatening. That's the part I can't get past. It wasn't trying to scare us. It was just present, like it had always been there. And we were the ones who didn't belong, like we'd walked into its house and didn't realize it until we saw it standing in the kitchen." He was medically discharged 7 months later. The official reason listed a combination of adjustment disorder and severe sleep disturbance. I've kept his contact information, but I haven't called. I don't know what I would say. I left the army in 2007. Honorable discharge, 14 years of service. I've worked in private security since then, mostly logistics, mostly desk work. I have a daughter who is 11 years old and who believes with complete confidence that I am one of the bravest men she has ever met. I have not told her about the river. I've gone back and forth on what I believe about those nights in Colombia. I am not by nature a superstitious man. My faith, such as it is modest and private. I don't believe in a great deal that I cannot see or touch. But I also spent 14 years being paid to evaluate threats, to look at a situation and determine very quickly whether something represented danger. And I can tell you that whatever was standing in that river, whatever made that sound, registered in some part of me that is older and more honest than reason, as something that existed outside the categories I'd been given. Not supernatural. That word is too dramatic, too Hollywood, more like a prior, like something that predates the frameworks we use to make sense of the world. The jungle is very old. The rivers in that part of South America are very old. We were very new in every sense that matters. I don't know what Mr. Williams will make of this account. I don't know what I make of it myself most days. But I promised myself that before I turned 50, I would write it down and give it to someone who collects these kinds of stories. Someone who takes them seriously without asking for proof I don't have. This is what happened. These are the facts as I remember them. The sound is still very clear in my memory. I imagine it will be for the rest of my life. The old toll detour. Good evening. What I'm about to tell you happened about 9 years ago when I was still new to long-haul driving and thought experience was just a matter of miles. Back then, I worked for a small transport company that moved construction materials between central and northern Mexico. I was in my early 20s, eager to prove myself, and like most rookies, I spent my first months riding with an older driver who taught me the trade. Not just how to shift on mountain grades or back a trailer into tight loading bays, but all the things nobody writes down. Which stations watered down their diesel, which stretches of road were better before dawn, which shortcuts were not worth the risk even if they saved fuel. My mentor was named Rogelio. He was in his 60s, thin, serious, and never wasted words. I drove with him for almost 3 months, and I don't think I ever saw him laugh. He was the kind of man who checked straps twice, signed papers without looking nervous, and could tell from engine sound when something wasn't right. If he said something, I listened. One afternoon on a run heading north, traffic on the main highway was backed up because of an overturned tanker. We lost almost 2 hours waiting. I was worried about the delivery window, but Rogelio didn't complain. He just smoked in silence, watched the line of cars, then finally took an old detour a local driver recommended over the CB. It was a narrow road that climbed through low hills and scrub forest, cracked pavement, no shoulder, no lights, and almost no traffic. At one point we passed the remains of an old toll plaza, just concrete islands, rusted metal poles, and what looked like abandoned maintenance sheds. Most of it was overgrown. Rogelio tapped the dashboard and pointed ahead with 2 fingers. "Remember this road," he said. "If you ever take it alone, don't stop at the old booths. Not for cones, not for flags, not for anyone waving you down." I thought he meant thieves. He kept looking forward and added, "And if you see road workers at night there, keep driving." I laughed a little, trying to lighten the mood. "Road workers? Out here? There's nothing to repair." He turned and gave me a look so hard it shut me up immediately. "I'm serious," he said. "Do not stop." I asked him what had happened there. He only crossed himself once, very fast, and said, "Some routes collect things. That one collects time." I didn't understand what he meant, and he never explained. A few weeks later, the company gave me my own truck. It wasn't new, not even close, but to me it felt like freedom. A white Freightliner with faded paint, a sleeper cab, and enough rattles to make you believe parts were going to fall off every time you hit a pothole. I took care of it like it was mine. One of my first solo assignments was a load of ceramic tile from Leon to Monterey. Heavy load, sealed trailer, paperwork in order, strict delivery window. I left in the afternoon expecting a routine trip. The weather was clear, the engine felt good, and I was in a great mood. Around dusk, traffic slowed to a crawl near a mountain section because of an accident. People were already getting down from buses and cars to look ahead. I checked the CB and heard the same thing from 3 different drivers. A trailer jackknifed across both lanes and cleanup was going to take hours. A pickup driver next to me told me there was an alternate route up ahead, an old toll detour that reconnects later to the main highway. The moment he said that, I remembered Rogelio. I should have stayed in line. I know that now. But I was young, I was alone, and I wanted to prove I could deliver on time. I did the math in my head. Thought of the company owner asking why I'd lost half a day on my first month solo, and when I saw 2 other trucks take the turn off, I followed. At first, the detour didn't seem so bad. The pavement was rough but passable. There were old signs bent by wind, faded lane markings, and long stretches where brush had invaded the edges. It looked like a road nobody maintained anymore, but not impossible. Then the sun dropped. Night came faster than I expected in those hills. One minute the sky was orange, the next it was dark blue and then black. I turned on my headlights and slowed down because the lane narrowed in places and there were deep cracks crossing the asphalt. There was no signal on my phone. My GPS froze once, then started lagging behind my actual position. I thought it was just the terrain. About 20 minutes in, my headlights caught the old toll area. It looked worse than I remembered. The booths were half broken, windows missing, weeds growing through concrete. A rusted barrier arm hung at an angle like a broken bone. There were also a few temporary road barriers off to one side, orange and white plastic ones, stacked like someone had started work and left years ago. I felt that same strange pressure in my chest I had felt with Rogelio, like my body recognized a place my mind didn't. I tightened my hands on the wheel and kept going. That's when something pale crossed in front of the truck. It happened so fast that even now I can't swear what it was. A white shape came out of the dark from the right side, low to the ground but not small. I slammed the brakes and heard a hit under the bumper, then a scraping sound that lasted half a second. I stopped about 30 meters ahead. For a few seconds I just sat there, heart pounding, hands shaking on the wheel. My first thought was a dog. There are always dogs near roads in Mexico, even in places where you'd think nothing could survive. My second thought was company protocol. If I hit something and damaged the unit, I had to report it. I remembered Rogelio telling me not to stop. But I also remembered the shape, and I'm the kind of person who can't leave an animal suffering if I think there's a chance to help. So I put the truck in neutral, set the brake, grabbed my flashlight, and got down. The road was completely silent. No other trucks, no insects, no wind in the brush, just the engine idling and the ticking sound metal makes when it cools. I checked the front bumper first. There was a smear across the lower grille, dark and wet looking in the flashlight beam. At first I thought it was blood, but when I touched it with a rag from the side compartment, it looked more like grease mixed with dirt. Stuck in it was a strip of something reflective, like the tape used on work vests or road barricades. That confused me. I searched along the shoulder, moving the flashlight over weeds, rocks, and broken concrete. I found no animal, no body, no blood trail, nothing. What I did find a few meters behind the truck was a single orange traffic cone lying on its side in the brush. It wasn't old. It looked almost new. I picked it up, then dropped it immediately because it was cold, so cold it felt like it had been inside a freezer. That may sound stupid, but I remember it clearly because the night itself wasn't cold enough for that. I went back to the cab, suddenly angry at myself for getting down. I told myself I'd clipped some debris, that was all. I got back on the road and tried to focus on driving. A few kilometers later, I started feeling that something was wrong again. Not danger exactly, more like a detail out of place that my brain couldn't grab. Then I saw it. A billboard on the left side of the road, half torn, advertising a soft drink. It had one corner peeled back and a bullet hole through the logo. I remembered noticing that exact billboard a few minutes earlier. I looked in the mirrors. Same road, same cracked lane, same dark brush. I checked the odometer and the trip distance. They were moving normally. I told myself there must be two old billboards from the same campaign. Then I passed a burned-out bus shell on the right shoulder with no windows and graffiti on the side. I had definitely seen that bus already. This time I know I had. I felt my mouth go dry. I sat up straight, turned off the stereo, and kept driving without blinking. I was sure I had taken no turn-offs. The road had been nearly straight. There was no place wide enough to turn a trailer around, and yet I was seeing the same landmarks. A crackle exploded from the CB radio and made me jump. I grabbed the mic, relieved to hear any human voice at all. "Yeah, go ahead," I said. "This is Unit 12, do you copy?" At first there was only static, then I heard a voice, but it sounded old and far away, like a recording with interference. "Lane 3 closed. Repeat, lane 3 closed." I frowned and pressed the mic again. "Who is this? You're breaking up." Static answered me, then another voice, different this time. "Bring the lights, we can't see the bus." I felt a chill run through my arms. Those didn't sound like truckers, they sounded like men on handheld radios, the kind road crews use. And the way they spoke, short, rushed, breathless, made it sound like they were in the middle of something bad. I turned the volume down but didn't turn it off. The road dipped and curved through a cut in the hills. As I came around the bend, I saw flashing amber lights ahead. For 1 second I felt relief. A work crew, I thought. Maybe the detour was active after all. Then my headlights reached them. It was one of those portable arrow boards used for lane closures mounted on a small trailer. The amber lights were blinking, but the panel itself was dark, no arrow, no message. Beside it stood a man in an orange reflective raincoat. There was no rain. He stood in the lane facing me, one arm raised as if signaling me to stop. I remembered Rogelio's exact words and my stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling. I moved to the center of the lane and leaned on the horn without slowing down. The man didn't move. For an insane second, I thought I was going to hit him. Then, when my headlights flooded him completely, I realized something that made me grip the wheel until my knuckles hurt. I couldn't see his face. The hood was down, but where his face should have been, there was only darkness, as if the light slid off it. I passed him so close I should have heard him hit the mirror. Nothing. In the side mirror, I saw the arrow board lights still blinking. The man was gone. After that, I started talking to myself just to stay steady. "You're tired, that's all. Stress, no sleep, too much caffeine. Get to the highway, get fuel, wash your face." I said those things out loud like I could force them to become true. A few minutes later, the road opened up and I saw concrete islands again. The old toll plaza. I stared at it in disbelief. It was impossible. I had already passed it. The booths were on the same side, same broken windows, same hanging barrier arm. But this time one booth had a light inside. A dim yellow light, the kind from an old office bulb. As I approached, a speaker crackled somewhere ahead, and a flat mechanical voice said in Spanish, "Take your ticket." My whole body went cold. There were no working machines there. I had seen the place in daylight weeks earlier. It had been abandoned. I didn't stop. I cut the wheel and took the widest line between two islands, trying to avoid the lowered barrier in the center lane. The trailer bounced over broken concrete, and I heard something smack the underside hard enough to make me curse. In the mirror, for just a second, I thought I saw someone sitting inside the lit booth. Not moving, just sitting and facing forward. I kept going. Then the knocking started. At first it sounded like the cargo shifting, which made no sense because the load was strapped and sealed. Then it came again. 3 knocks, metallic, spaced evenly. Not from inside the trailer, but from the outside near the rear. Knock, knock, knock. I checked air pressure, brake temperatures, trailer response. Everything looked normal. The knocks came again. I was not going to stop. Not there. Not for anything. The road descended in a series of curves, and my nerves were so bad I could barely feel my legs. I watched the mirrors constantly, and twice I thought I saw a small light moving behind the trailer low to the ground, like someone carrying a lamp and keeping pace with me. Every time I looked directly, there was nothing. At some point I noticed the clock on the dashboard. 8:14 p.m. That didn't make sense. I had entered the detour before sunset. It felt like I had been on that road for hours. My back hurt, my eyes burned, and I was certain it had to be close to midnight. I checked my phone. No signal, but same time. A curve later, I finally saw bright white lights ahead and nearly cried from relief. I thought it was the main highway. It wasn't. It was a bridge work zone. Portable towers lit up a narrow steel bridge crossing a ravine. Cones lined both sides. A sign read, "1 lane /stop/flagman." And in the middle of the bridge stood 3 men in orange reflective gear. They were facing away from me, looking down into the ravine. None of them moved. I slowed without meaning to. My foot just did it. The closest one raised his arm, still without turning, and pointed downward, as if showing me something over the edge. My truck rolled forward at maybe 10 kilometers an hour. Then the CB radio screamed with static so loud I flinched, and through it I heard a voice I knew. "Don't stop, mijo." It was Rogelio. Not like Rogelio, it was his voice. Same rough tone, same way he dragged the last word. My eyes filled with tears from pure panic. I stomped the accelerator. The engine roared and the truck surged forward. The men on the bridge turned toward me all at once. I will never forget what I saw in that second. Their reflective stripes shone bright in my headlights, but their clothes looked torn and blackened, like they had been dragged through mud and fire. One man's helmet was split, another had half his face covered in something dark. The third one was missing his left sleeve entirely, and his arm underneath looked wrong, bent in a way no arm should bend. They didn't jump away like real men would. They just watched me come through them. I swear to God I felt resistance on the front of the truck, like driving through heavy water. Then I was across the bridge. The lights behind me went out instantly. Not one by one, all at once. I didn't look back again. A few minutes later, the road widened and I saw the green signs of the main highway ahead. Real highway lights, real traffic, a bus, 2 pickups, a fuel station with people walking around. I pulled into the station so hard I almost took the curb with the trailer. I got down shaking so badly I could barely hold my wallet. The attendant looked at me and asked if I was sick. I told him I needed coffee and water. He kept staring at me, then asked, "Where did you come from?" I pointed behind me and named the detour. The man's expression changed immediately. "There's no access there at night," he said. "They closed that road years ago after the bridge collapse." I told him I had just come through it. I told him there were lights, cones, workers. He shook his head and said very quietly, "A maintenance crew died there, and people still say they're working." I didn't answer. I didn't want stories from him. I wanted something normal, something mechanical I could understand. So I inspected the truck. The front grille had no blood, no fur, nothing like that, but wedged into the lower bumper was a strip of reflective orange fabric, torn and greasy, exactly like the material on a road worker's vest. On the right side of the trailer, near the rear, there were 3 dents in the metal lined up horizontally, fresh and bright where the paint had chipped. 3 knocks. The load seal was intact. The cargo had not moved. I checked the clock again when I calmed down. It was 8:47 p.m. From where I had turned into the detour to that station, even on a clear run, it should have taken more than an hour. It had felt like an entire night. According to the clock, less than 50 minutes had passed. When I arrived in Monterey the next morning, I looked like I hadn't slept in days. The receiving clerk asked if I'd been drinking. I said no and signed my papers with hands that still wouldn't stop trembling. I told no one at the company except Rogelio. I went to his house 2 days later on my day off and asked if he had ever gone through that road at night. He listened without interrupting, smoking the whole time. When I finished, he sat in silence so long I thought he hadn't heard me. Then he asked one thing. "Did they wave you to stop?" I said yes. He nodded once, looked at the floor and said, "Then you were lucky." I asked him what he meant by "that road collects time" and what happened there, and why his voice came through my CB when he wasn't anywhere near me. He stood up, stubbed out the cigarette, and told me to leave that route alone forever. That was all. Rogelio retired less than a year later after a stroke. He lost much of his speech. I visited him twice, but he could barely talk, and I never asked him again. Whatever he knew stayed with him. I've driven thousands of kilometers since that night. I've seen robberies, accidents, bodies covered with blankets, and things on the road that are human enough to frighten you more than any ghost. I don't scare easily anymore. But I never took that detour again. And to this day, if I'm driving late and I hear static on the CB, I turn the volume down before the voices can come through. Because a part of me still believes that if I ever hear them clearly again, I might lose more than an hour next time. I might not come back at all. Dear Mr. Williams, good evening. My name is Ivan, and I'm from Mexico. I'm 37 years old, and for most of my adult life I served in the Mexican Army. I won't say exactly which unit, and I also won't give the real name of the place I'm about to mention because there are still people there and I don't want to cause them any trouble. I'm writing this because I've listened to several stories on your channel, and for the first time in many years I felt like maybe there are some things I experienced that should be told even if people don't believe them. I'm not offended if someone says I imagined it. If I had heard this from another man before it happened to me, I probably would have said the same. I'm not a nervous person. I was trained to move toward danger, not away from it. I've seen shootings, cartel houses, kidnappings, bodies left on roads, and scenes I still don't talk about even with my family. I've seen what human beings can do to each other for money, revenge, or fear. That kind of evil is real and it doesn't need ghosts. Still, every now and then something happens that doesn't fit into any report, any military logic, or any explanation you can give your commanding officer without sounding like you've lost your mind. This happened in the mountains of southern Mexico, a little after the rainy season had started. There was an old mission property a few kilometers from a federal road. It wasn't a convent exactly, but most people called it one, because it was run by a small group of elderly nuns and 2 younger women who were training under them. The place also served as a shelter sometimes for villagers displaced by violence in nearby ranches. Behind the mission there was a long stretch of thick brush, ravines, and old trails used for moving livestock years ago. Later, those same trails started getting used by armed groups for things that had nothing to do with livestock. We were sent there because men from one criminal cell had begun pressuring the sisters for food, medicine, and access to the back trails. A few weeks earlier, according to a local police report, 2 armed men had entered the property drunk at night and tried to force one of the younger women to open a storage room. They were chased off by villagers, but after that the sisters were terrified. Our orders were simple: maintain a rotating security presence around the mission, discourage intrusions, and report suspicious movement in the hills. Nothing heroic, routine work. There were 3 of us assigned to that position for several nights, me, a corporal named Serrano, and another soldier everyone called Tato. We rotated shifts, patrolled the perimeter, and occasionally spoke with the sisters if they needed something. The mission itself was old: stone walls, wooden beams, cracked floors, and a chapel that leaned just enough to make you think it might collapse in the next earthquake. But everything was clean, very clean. The sisters were the kind of people who lived with almost nothing and still made the place feel dignified. They grew corn, beans, medicinal herbs, and kept chickens behind a low wall. No television, barely any signal for a phone, and no unnecessary conversation. I had never spent much time around nuns before that assignment. I'm Catholic because of my mother and I still pray, but I'm not the type to talk a lot about religion. Even so, I respected them. They were disciplined in a way soldiers understand. They had their routine, their silence, their work, and their faith. After a few days, they got used to us. One of the older sisters, Sister Eugenia, would bring us coffee in metal cups at sunset if she saw us near the kitchen entrance. Another, Sister Marta, always asked if we had eaten. She had a strict face but kind eyes. The Mother Superior was a very thin woman named Sister Inez. She spoke softly, but when she gave an instruction, the others obeyed immediately. There was something firm about her, not rude, just firm. Everything felt normal at first. Then on the 5th night I noticed something strange. It was close to midnight. I was doing a perimeter pass along the side of the mission where the dormitory rooms were. Usually by 9 everything went quiet. You could hear insects, distant dogs, sometimes the wind in the trees. But that night there was movement inside, quick footsteps, doors opening and closing, low voices, and once what sounded like someone dragging furniture. I walked to the side entrance and knocked. Sister Marta opened the door just enough to look out. "Is everything all right?" I asked. She looked tired, not scared, tired. "Yes, officer. Thank you. Please continue your patrol. There's a lot of noise. It's an internal matter. Do you need medical help? Should I radio the base?" She shook her head quickly. No radio, please, we can handle it." Before I could ask anything else, Sister Inez appeared behind her. She looked directly at me and said in a very controlled voice, "For tonight, do not enter the north wing. I ask you this respectfully." I remember that exact phrase because it bothered me. It sounded polite but also like an order. "What's happening?" I asked. She held my gaze for a moment and then said, "Something that concerns us, not you." Then they closed the door. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. I heard a cry from deeper in the building, high, sharp, and cut off too quickly. Not a normal cry. I almost knocked again, but at that moment Serrano came around from the garden side and asked what was going on. I told him what they said. Tato joined us a little later, and after hearing us, he got quiet in a way that was unusual for him. He was a talkative guy, always making jokes. "What?" I asked him. "Say it." He hesitated and then said that earlier that afternoon he had seen 2 of the younger sisters helping one of the older ones across the courtyard. At first he thought the old woman was sick, but when they got closer, he saw her body jerking violently like she was fighting them. He also said she had something clenched in her mouth. "What thing?" Serrano asked. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe cloth, maybe wood, I couldn't tell." "Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged. "They said she gets attacks. I didn't want to make a report over an old lady fainting. We kept watch the rest of the night and nothing else happened, but I didn't sleep well the next day. I had bad dreams. Those heavy ones where you wake up sweaty and can't remember the details, only the feeling that you were being watched." The following afternoon, Serrano and Tato were redirected to support an urgent operation after a road incident several kilometers away. I was told I would cover the mission post alone until dawn, with transport dropping me off at dusk and picking me up after first light. I didn't like that, not because of cartel risk. We were used to being alone, but because I didn't want to go back there after the previous night. It sounds ridiculous now, but while I was checking my gear at the barracks, I had this tightness in my stomach, not panic. More like the body knows something before the mind accepts it. The truck left me at the gate a little before sunset. The sky was turning dark blue behind the hills, and the mission looked different than usual. The same building, same stone walls, same chapel cross, but it had that look some places get when night falls and every shadow seems deeper than it should be. The sisters were all inside. No one was in the courtyard. No kitchen light, no voices, nothing. I approached the main door and knocked. After a while, Sister Inez opened. "I'm on duty tonight," I said. "Just checking if everything is calm." She nodded, but kept her body blocking the doorway. "Everything is calm, officer. Thank you." I looked past her. The hallway behind her was lit by candles, even though they had a generator for a few lights. "Is someone sick?" I asked. She took a breath, and for the first time I saw real concern in her face. "Listen carefully," she said. "Tonight you must stay outside. Do not enter the building after the final bell." "Why?" Because if you enter, what happens inside may not be what you think you are seeing. I stared at her, honestly unsure if I had heard her correctly. What does that mean? She looked toward the dark hallway and then back at me. It means we are trying to protect you. Before I could answer, she closed the door. I spent the next few hours circling the perimeter, checking the back wall, the chicken pens, the trail entrance, and the small field beyond the chapel. The air was cool and a wet wind came down from the hills. Around 9:30, I began hearing prayer chants from inside the mission. Low at first, then stronger. Not normal evening prayer. It sounded urgent. At exactly 10, the chapel bell rang. Not the usual single call. It rang 4 slow times, paused, and then rang once more, shorter and sharper. Immediately after that, the chanting stopped. I remember every second of what came next. I was near the dormitory side when I heard a scream from inside. I've heard men scream after being shot. I've heard people crying in hospitals. This was neither. It sounded like a woman trying to scream through a throat that didn't want to produce a human sound. There was a rasp in it, a kind of broken animal noise. The windows on the north wing were lit, except one. That window was covered from the inside with a thick dark cloth. I went to the main door and pounded hard. No answer. I tried again, louder, shouting, "Sister Inez, open the door." Nothing. I pushed the door. It moved. It hadn't been locked. The hallway inside was colder than the air outside. That's the first thing I noticed. Cold and damp with candlelight trembling against the stone walls. I called out again. No response. As I moved down the corridor, I heard footsteps somewhere ahead of me, then to my left, then behind me, too fast to make sense. I turned with my flashlight and caught a figure crossing a side passage. It looked like one of the nuns, but without her veil, hair loose and moving in a strange, unsteady way, almost sideways. I only saw her for a second before she vanished into a room and the door slammed shut. I went to the door and grabbed the handle, locked. "Open up," I shouted. "Army, open the door." Something tapped lightly on the other side. 3 taps, then silence. The scream came again, closer this time. I drew my pistol not because I planned to use it on the sisters, but because by then I no longer believed I was dealing with something simple. Maybe intruders, maybe someone hiding inside, maybe one of the armed men had gotten in and was forcing them to stay quiet. I needed to be ready. I kept moving toward the north wing. The candles along the walls began to dim at the same time, as if a draft had passed through, but I felt no wind. My flashlight beam shook because my hand had started trembling without me noticing. At the end of the corridor, there should have been a storage room and a dead end. I knew that from walking the building before. But when I reached it, the storage room door was open, and behind it there was a narrow passage I had never seen in daylight. Stone steps. Descending. I stopped there, trying to think clearly. I told myself there must be a cellar, maybe an old cistern. Old religious buildings have hidden rooms all the time. Nothing supernatural about that. Then I heard the scream again from below. And mixed with it I heard prayer, many voices praying fast in Latin. I went down. The staircase turned twice and opened into a rough tunnel cut through earth and stone. The walls were wet, water dripped steadily somewhere ahead. The passage sloped downward, and after maybe 30 meters the floor turned muddy. My boots sank and made a sucking sound each step. The air changed too. It smelled like wet minerals, wax, and something sour I couldn't identify. I called out, "Sister Inez, it's me, I'm coming down." No answer. The tunnel continued farther than I expected. In places it looked old, hand-carved. In others it seemed reinforced later with brick. I remember thinking, how can this be under the mission and no one mentioned it? Then my flashlight caught movement at the far end, several shadows shifting against orange light. I moved faster. The tunnel opened into a circular chamber, maybe 15 or 20 meters across, with a low ceiling stained black from smoke. Candles and 2 oil lamps lit the place. There were religious images on the walls, old, damaged, almost unrecognizable, and in the center stood a stone structure like an old well, waist-high, with iron rings fixed into it. Around that well were all the sisters. They stood shoulder to shoulder, praying. Some were crying. 2 of them were holding down a young woman on a wooden chair, one of the novices, the one they called Lucia. Her wrists were tied with strips of cloth to the chair arms. At least that is what I understood later. What I saw in that first moment was something else entirely. In the light of those candles, with the shouting, the echo, and the fear already inside me, My mind turned the scene into a nightmare. I saw Lucia's head hanging back and thought her throat had been cut. I saw dark stains on her dress and thought it was blood. I saw Sister Inez holding a metal crucifix and thought it was a blade. "Stop!" I shouted. Every head turned toward me at once. Lucia snapped forward and screamed. Her voice was wrong, deep, raw, almost like a man's voice forced through her throat. The sound hit me so hard my chest tightened. One of the sisters yelled, "Why did you come down?" I took 2 steps closer and pointed my pistol at the floor, not at them. "What are you doing to her?" Sister Inez moved toward me quickly, both hands raised. "Put that away, you should not be here." Lucia started laughing. I swear to God on my mother's life, I had never heard a laugh like that. It came out of that young woman, but it did not sound like her. It sounded old, mocking, full of hate. Then she said my name. Not officer, not soldier. My full name. Only my family and my unit used my full name there. "Ivan," she said, dragging the word and smiling in a way that made my stomach turn. "You came anyway." One of the sisters slapped a rosary against Lucia's chest, and the novice arched so hard the chair nearly tipped over. The lamps flickered. The chamber seemed to tilt. That is when everything became confused. Lucia began choking and spitting dark liquid. The sisters tightened their grip to keep her from falling. I saw them leaning over her, their shadows stretching across the walls. In that light, they no longer looked like old women. Their faces looked longer, mouths wider, eyes glittering like wet glass. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Don't let him leave." I spun around. No one was there. When I turned back, Sister Inez was closer, speaking to me, but I could not understand the words. Her voice sounded distant, as if I were underwater. Lucia laughed again and then screamed, "He saw the road. He saw what was buried there." I don't know what she meant. To this day, I don't know. My ears started ringing. My flashlight beam jumped wildly across the chamber. And for 1 second, just 1 second, I saw the old well in the center as if it were open and deep, deeper than any well should be, with water moving far below and something pale turning inside it. I stepped back. My heel slipped in mud. I almost fell, caught myself, and that movement triggered panic in the sisters. 2 of them rushed toward me, probably trying to stop me from pointing the gun around in that tight space. But in my state, I thought they were attacking me. I shoved one aside and ran. I heard them yelling behind me. The tunnel back seemed longer than before. I ran blind half the time, crashing against wet walls, boots splashing through water, breath burning in my throat. More than once I heard footsteps behind me, fast, bare feet slapping stone. I looked back and saw shapes in white habits moving low to the ground. Maybe they were just slipping while trying to follow. Maybe it was the light. But in that moment it looked like they were crawling. I started praying out loud while running, not because I'm brave, because I was terrified. Holy Mary, Mother of God. I reached the stairs, took them 2 at a time, and something hit my shoulder from the side. Hard. I slammed against the wall and fell backward. My head struck stone. The gun flew from my hand. The last thing I remember before blacking out was seeing a face over me in the candlelight. It was Lucia's face, but older somehow, twisted with a smile too wide for her mouth. Then darkness. When I woke up, I was lying on a wooden bench in the chapel above. Morning light was coming through the cracked colored glass. My head was bandaged. My uniform shirt was open at the collar, and I could smell alcohol and medicinal herbs. For a few seconds I didn't move. I just listened. Someone was praying nearby. I sat up fast and almost fell again from dizziness. Sister Marta was there. So was Sister Eugenia. They both looked exhausted. "Easy," Sister Marta said. "You hit your head." I looked around wildly. "Where is she?" "Who?" "The novice, Lucia." Sister Marta and Eugenia exchanged a look. "She is resting," Eugenia said, "and so should you." I tried to stand. "What happened? Where's my weapon?" Sister Marta handed me my pistol, unloaded, wrapped in a cloth. "Safe," she said. "We removed the magazine when we found you." "When you found me where?" "At the top of the cellar stairs," she answered. "Unconscious." I stared at her. "No, I was in the chamber underground. You were all there." At that point, Sister Inez entered the chapel. She looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. Her veil was damp. There were scratches on one hand and a bruise on her wrist. She sat on the bench across from me and folded her hands. "We warned you," she said. Not angry, just tired. We told you not to come inside after the bell. I wanted to accuse them of something. I still didn't even know what, but my head hurt, and once I was in daylight, the whole night began to feel unreal, like a fever dream mixed with pieces of truth. What were you doing down there? I asked. She was silent for a moment, then answered carefully. This mission was built over older structures. There is an old cistern burial chamber from many years ago. During certain nights, when one of our sisters suffers attacks, we take her there because the walls are thick and far from the sleeping rooms. We pray. We restrain her so she does not injure herself. She said my name. Sister Inez didn't blink. Yes. How? I don't know. She laughed at me. I stopped because saying it out loud made me feel foolish. It didn't sound like her. Sister Inez looked toward the chapel altar. There are things I will not explain because I cannot prove them, she said. And there are things I will not explain because speaking of them carelessly gives them strength. You may choose the explanation you prefer. A sick young woman in crisis, fumes from the old chamber, fear, echoes, suggestion, or something else. I said nothing. Then she added in a lower voice, "But you were not the first man to enter after we were told not to admit anyone. And the others also believed they saw violence where there was prayer." That sentence stayed with me more than anything else. I asked to see the underground chamber again in daylight. She refused immediately. No. Why? Because you're still thinking about what you saw, and places like that are dangerous when a person enters looking for proof. That answer irritated me. It sounded like superstition. I almost argued, but the pain in my head pulsed so hard I had to sit back down. Transport arrived after sunrise. I made a short report and left out most of what happened. I wrote that I entered the building after hearing distress sounds, discovered an unreported cellar structure, suffered a fall during low visibility movement, and was assisted by the residents. That was enough to explain the injury without inviting psychiatric questions. By the afternoon, new orders came in. Our unit was reassigned because the situation on the nearby trails had cooled down after several arrests. Another team would do occasional patrols, but the overnight fixed post at the mission was suspended. I never got the chance to return properly. For weeks I told myself the whole thing had been a mix of stress, bad sleep, poor light, religious atmosphere, and a head injury. That explanation is possible. I'm not an ignorant man. I know fear can distort what you see. I know a person in convulsions can sound inhuman. I know old underground spaces can affect breathing and judgment. But there are 3 details I still cannot explain. The first is that when I cleaned my boots later that day, they were packed with a pale grey mud, unlike the red-brown soil around the mission grounds. I later saw the same color only once in a quarry far from that region. The second is that my shoulder had a bruise in the shape of a hand, long fingers, very thin, almost like an elderly person's hand gripping hard. Sister Marta had said they found me at the top of the stairs. If that was true, someone had to drag or lift me there. The third is the one that made me decide to write to you. When I emptied my uniform pockets that night at the barracks, I found a small object I had never seen before. An old wooden bead from a rosary, split cleanly down the middle as if someone had bitten it. I kept it for a long time. I don't have it anymore. Years later, during a move, I lost the tin box where I stored old service items. Sometimes I think that's better. I still pray, maybe more than before. And sometimes when I hear a chapel bell at night, especially if it rings in an odd pattern, I remember the sound of Lucia laughing in that underground chamber and saying my name as if she had known me for years. If you decide to share this story, Mr. Williams, please do not mention my full name or the exact location. I'm telling it because I've carried it alone for too long, and because men like me are trained to report what we can prove. But not everything that happens in this world arrives with proof. Some things only leave a mark, a bruise, or a sound in your memory that never really goes away. Mr. Williams, you asked me once, after one of our long hauls back from the refinery in Beaumont, why I always slow down when we cross the Atchafalaya Basin. You said I gripped the wheel differently there. Tighter, like a man holding on to something he's afraid to let go. I laughed it off. Told you it was just the fog. That was a lie. The truth is that stretch of Interstate 10, somewhere between Baton Rouge and Lafayette, is where it happened. Where I happened, I should say. Or maybe where I came apart and then somehow found my way back together. I've never told anyone the full story. Not my wife, not my daughter, not even the counselor they made me see as part of the program. But you deserve to know because you were the one who gave me back the keys when everyone else thought I was finished. This is what happened. It started in the fall of 2021, long before you hired me. I was doing weekend runs for a smaller outfit out of Shreveport, mostly dry goods and construction material heading west toward Dallas. On one of those weekends, my brother-in-law Marcus convinced me to go rock climbing with him at Enchanted Rock in the Texas Hill Country. I had no business being there. I was 42 years old with bad knees and a soft belly from too many diner breakfasts and too many hours sitting behind a wheel. But Marcus had a way of making you feel like staying home was a kind of defeat, and I've never liked feeling defeated. I was about 60 feet up. Nothing serious by any climber's standard, but serious enough for a man who hadn't done it since his 20s. When the harness anchor gave, I remember the sound before I remember the falling, a sharp, clean crack like a bat hitting a ball, except it came from inside my own body. I landed on a narrow ledge about 15 feet below. Marcus and his friends got me down, drove me 2 hours to the hospital in Austin, and by the time a doctor was standing over me with an X-ray, I had learned that the sound I'd heard was my left hip shattering in 3 places. The surgery took 4.5 hours. They put in a titanium plate and 6 screws. The surgeon, a young Indian man whose name I never caught properly, told me afterward that the recovery would take 4 to 6 months and that the pain would be, in his words, significant and sustained. He was not exaggerating. I won't spend too much time on the pain itself, Mr. Williams, because I don't want this letter to read like self-pity. What I'll say is this: there is a kind of pain that doesn't just hurt. It thinks. It has its own intelligence, its own agenda. It wakes you at 3 in the morning, not because it has gotten worse, but because it wants you to know it's still there. It follows you into the half-sleep you manage to steal in the afternoons. It turns you into a person you don't recognize, a person who would do almost anything to make it stop. The hospital prescribed me an opioid painkiller. I will not name it here, though I expect you can guess the general category. They told me to take it every 8 hours. Every 8 hours it turned the pain from a roar into a whisper, and for about 40 minutes. Sometimes 50 if I was lucky. I could feel something close to normal. Then the whisper would grow back into a roar. By the 3rd week I was taking it every 6 hours. By the 5th week, every 4. My wife Denise is a practical woman. She noticed the pills disappearing faster than they should have. She didn't confront me directly. That's not her way. But she started filling the prescription herself, counting what remained in the bottle before bed each night. I noticed her counting. I started hiding pills in the side pocket of my overnight bag, building a small reserve. I told myself it was just until the hip healed. I told myself a lot of things, though the hip healed, the knee didn't. By the time I came to work for you, I had been off the prescription for 3 months, but had found other ways to get what I needed. There was a man in the neighborhood, I'll call him Carl, though that wasn't his name, who moved various things through various channels, and one of those things happened to be the particular medication I required. I paid him in cash. It was expensive. I started dipping into the household savings and telling Denise the money was going toward the co-pays from the surgery, which were real enough that she believed me. I want to be clear, I was functional, or I appeared functional, which is its own particular skill, one that addicts develop with a precision that would be impressive if it weren't so sad. I passed your road test, I passed the physical, I answered your interview questions about safety records and route experience with total confidence, because those things, the work, the road, the truck, were the one part of my life that hadn't been contaminated. Behind the wheel I was still myself, or so I believed. What I didn't tell you, what I couldn't have told you, was that I was timing my doses around my shifts. I had calculated with something like pride that if I took a pill 90 minutes before getting in the cab, the worst of the drowsiness would pass by the time I was on the highway. What I hadn't calculated was what happened when a run went long, when traffic or weather or a difficult pickup pushed my schedule back by 2 or 3 hours. On those days I drove through withdrawal, my hand shook, my vision would soften at the edges, blurring the tree lines and exit signs into smears. Sometimes I heard things. A voice just under the frequency of the road noise saying nothing I could make out, just present, just there. I managed it for 8 months. And then came the night of the Baton Rouge run. You had asked me to take a refrigerated trailer down to a distributor in New Orleans, overnighting it and coming back the next morning. I remember it was November because the oak trees along the I-10 still had their leaves, but they'd turned that dry, papery brown that means they're about to let go. I left the depot at 6 in the evening just as the light was going orange over the refinery towers. The run should have taken 2.5 hours. I was behind schedule before I'd even crossed the state line. A wreck on the bridge over the Sabine River had traffic backed up for 40 minutes. By the time I was through it, I was already calculating. My last pill had been at 4:30. That gave me roughly 3 hours before the withdrawal started making its presence known. I had a reserve pill in the overnight bag. If I could make New Orleans by 9, unload, sleep a few hours, and take the reserve in the morning, I'd be fine. I was not fine. The traffic delay had thrown off everything, and by the time I hit the Atchafalaya Basin, that long, low causeway over the swamp, the one you've heard me go quiet about, it was nearly 9 o'clock and the withdrawal had started. Not the worst of it, not the full storm, but the early weather, the barometric pressure dropping, hands not quite steady, the back of my skull beginning to tighten, that familiar narrowing of the world. The basin at night is like driving through the bottom of the ocean, no lights for miles in either direction. The road floats above a flat black water that you can smell but not see. The cypress trees stand in the water on either side like figures watching. I've crossed it 100 times in daylight without thinking twice. At night, in the condition I was in, it felt like driving through a place that existed at the edge of things. That's when I saw the man. He was standing on the shoulder of the highway, just past a small green marker sign that read Kilometer 47, one of those old distance markers they'd never replaced with mileage after the highway was repaved. He was dressed in work clothes, jeans and a pale shirt, facing away from me, not hitchhiking, not in distress as far as I could tell, just standing there at 9:15 on a November night in the middle of the Atchafalaya Basin, facing the swamp. I slowed without meaning to. Something about his stillness was wrong in a way I couldn't name. I passed him. I had to. There was nowhere to pull over safely. And I watched him in my driver's side mirror. He didn't move, he didn't turn, he just stood there getting smaller in the mirror, his pale shirt catching the last of my taillights until the darkness swallowed him. I told myself what you tell yourself. Breakdown. Car trouble somewhere ahead or behind. Man catching some air. I noted the marker, Kilometer 47, and drove on. I made the delivery. I slept 4 hours in the cab in the distributor's parking lot. I took my reserve pill at 4 in the morning and felt the world smooth out again, the way ice does when you run warm water over it. By 7, I was back on the interstate heading north. Coffee in the cup holder, talk radio murmuring, the basin ahead of me in the grey morning light. I was fine. I was genuinely, objectively fine. And then I saw the Kilometer 47 marker. I saw it twice. The first time I passed it going south the evening before, and now I was passing it going north. Except I was heading toward Baton Rouge, which meant I was going the right direction, which meant the marker should have been different. I should have been reading the distances back toward New Orleans, decreasing numbers. The marker should have read something in the 80s or 90s. It read Kilometer 47. I told myself the highway authority had simply put 2 identical markers, one on each side of the road. Errors like that happen. Bureaucratic mistakes. I drove on. The man in the pale shirt was standing on the shoulder. He was facing the swamp, the same posture. Shoulders slightly rounded, head tilted down, as if reading something in the water. I know, because I slowed again and watched him in my mirror for as long as I could, that he never turned. From behind, you could not have said how old he was, or whether he was in distress, or what he was doing there. He was simply a man with his back to the world. I pulled over at the first truck stop past the bridge. I sat in the cab for 20 minutes. I drank coffee that tasted like hot cardboard, and I tried to think clearly about what I was experiencing. I had 2 candidates, the pills or something else. Neither option was comfortable. The pills had given me minor hallucinations before. Shadows at the edge of vision, sounds that weren't there. But nothing with this kind of persistence. Nothing I could pull over, get out of the truck, and still see in my mind with the same steady clarity. Hallucinations fade when you challenge them. This didn't feel like it was fading. A woman came out of the diner to sweep the front step. She was in her 60s, heavy-set, with the kind of slow, efficient movement that comes from doing a job for decades. I got out and asked her if she knew the basin well. She looked at me the way anyone looks at a strange man asking a strange question at 7 in the morning. I've lived by it my whole life, she said. At kilometer 47, I said, is there a pullout, a place where someone could stand on the shoulder safely? She squinted. Kilometer markers are old, nobody uses them, but around there, yeah, there's a wide shoulder, old maintenance access. She paused. Why? I told her I'd seen someone standing there, a man in a pale shirt, both times I'd passed facing the water. She was quiet for a moment, then she said carefully, the way you say something you're not sure you believe yourself. My daddy used to say there were places in the basin where things line up wrong. He was Cajun, old family, believed all kinds of things. She shook her head, dismissing it. More likely you're tired and playing tricks on yourself. Yes, I said, probably. Get some breakfast, she said. It helps. I got breakfast, eggs and toast, which I barely touched. I sat in the booth by the window looking out at the parking lot and the grey line of the highway and the flat, dark tree line beyond it, and I thought about what was actually happening to me. Not the man on the shoulder, not the repeated kilometer marker. I thought about the pills, and about Denise counting bottles in the evenings, and about Carl and the cash, and about the 8 months I had spent managing something I could not manage much longer. I thought about you, Mr. Williams, and about what you'd said to me on my first day. That you ran a small operation and you needed people you could count on, and that if I was ever in trouble of any kind, the door was open. I hadn't believed you particularly. People say things like that. But sitting in that truck stop booth with the eggs going cold in front of me, I thought, what if he meant it? I drove back to Baton Rouge. I didn't take the bypass. I took the surface roads all the way to the depot because I didn't want to cross the basin again that morning. When I got there, I came into your office and I told you I needed help. You were quiet for a long time. Then you asked me one question. Have you hurt anyone? I said no. You said, then we fix it. I've told you this story not to explain myself, Mr. Williams, or to relitigate what you already know. Leave the program, the slow work of the last 2 years. I've told it because I realized not long ago that I never told you what actually happened on that bridge. You know about the addiction. You know about the treatment. You didn't know about the man in the pale shirt. I've thought about him a great deal, and I've thought about what the woman at the truck stop said, about places where things line up wrong, and I've thought about what I know about the mind under withdrawal, the way it bends, the way it starts to fold space and time to accommodate its hunger. I am a practical man. I believe in the mechanical explanation. I believe probably that I was experiencing a dissociative episode brought on by early withdrawal, and that the kilometer marker discrepancy was a simple counting error made by a man with shaking hands and a narrowing field of attention. But I also know this. Both times I saw him, the basin was absolutely silent. No frogs, no insects, no wind in the cypress. Just the water and the road and the man standing at the edge of it, looking into something I could not see. I don't know what he was looking at. I don't know if he was real. I know that whatever I was looking at, him or the version of myself I was becoming, I am glad I turned away from it when I did. Thank you for the open door. Dear Mr. Williams, good evening. My name is Raphael and I've been listening to your channel for almost a year now. I usually play your stories while I'm driving at night, especially on the long roads when the road gets quiet and the mind starts wandering. I've heard many testimonies on your channel that reminded me of things I've seen myself. I work as a truck driver, and when you spend enough years on highways, you stop laughing at certain stories. I haul cargo between states in Mexico, mostly appliances, furniture, and sometimes construction materials. I don't scare easily. I've driven through storms, roadblocks, landslides, and places where it's better not to stop even if your tire is coming apart. I've seen people walking on the shoulder at 3 in the morning where there are no towns for miles. I've seen headlights behind me for 20 minutes that suddenly vanish when I pull over. I've heard voices on the CB when the radio was unplugged. But what happened to me 2 years ago on the road between San Luis Potosi and Zacatecas is the only thing that still keeps me awake some nights. And the worst part is that there was a witness. My helper Martin was with me. Martin had been working with me for about 3 years at that point. He wasn't just a loader. He helped with paperwork, securing cargo, checking manifests, and sometimes navigating when I was too tired to think straight. He was younger than me by maybe 10 years, always joking, always talking, always making fun of how I drank coffee like it was medicine. Good worker, reliable, the kind of guy you trust with your keys. That night we were returning from a delivery in Fresnillo. We had dropped off a set of industrial shelving units and some packaged tools for a hardware distributor. It had taken longer than planned because of a delay at the warehouse, so by the time we headed back it was already dark and getting colder by the minute. It was winter, and that dry cold in the north gets into your hands and ears in a way that feels sharp like tiny needles. At first everything was normal, and the road was quiet, very little traffic. We were talking about ordinary things, Martin complaining about his landlord, me talking about a brake issue I wanted the mechanic to check, both of us arguing over where to stop to eat once we reached a town with decent tacos. The heater worked, the engine felt fine, and we were making good time. Then we entered a low stretch of road surrounded by flat fields. I know that section well. On one side there are old irrigation channels and abandoned plots. On the other side, dry grass and fencing. Nothing special, but that night a fog started forming so fast it looked unnatural. 1 minute I could still see the reflectors ahead. The next, the world in front of the truck turned white. I'm not talking about light mist. I'm talking about dense fog, thick enough that the beams of the headlights bounced back at us. I lowered the speed immediately. 40, then 30, hazard lights on. I leaned forward over the steering wheel the way drivers do when visibility gets bad, as if getting closer to the windshield helps. Martin stopped joking. He rolled down his window a little and looked out, then shut it right away because of the cold. "Rafa," he said, "this is bad. Pull over. Let it pass." I kept going a little more, trying to reach a clearer stretch, but I nearly drifted into the shoulder when the lane line disappeared for a second. That was enough for me. No load is worth dying for. I eased the truck over and parked on what I believed was the right shoulder. I left the hazards on and kept the engine running for heat. The fog outside looked like milk. We waited. At first we talked, then we didn't. After 10 minutes of staring into that white wall, time started feeling strange. The truck cabin felt isolated, like we were parked inside a closed room and the road no longer existed. Martin said he was going down for a minute to pee and check the rear straps. "Don't take forever," I told him. "If you get kidnapped by a ghost, I'm not filling out the report." He laughed, grabbed his flashlight, and got out. I watched his light move past the passenger side mirror for a few seconds, then the fog swallowed it. I stayed in the cab. I poured coffee from my thermos. It was hot enough to burn my tongue, but I welcomed it. I turned on the radio to distract myself and realized I couldn't catch a single station, not one. Just static, and sometimes not even static, just a dead hiss, like the speaker had no signal at all. That was strange because I had passed through there many times and always had at least 2 local stations. I tried the CB. Nothing. Then I checked my phone to message my wife and let her know we'd be late. No signal. No bars. No data. Nothing. Not even emergency signal. I lifted the phone toward the windshield like an idiot, as if height inside the cab would make a difference. Still nothing. I remember thinking, fine, fog and bad reception. It happens. I took another sip of coffee and waited. 5 minutes passed. Maybe more. No Martin. I honked lightly once. No reaction. I rolled down my window and called out, "Martin?" Nothing. I called again, louder. The fog swallowed my voice so fast it sounded weak, like I was yelling into a pillow. I started getting annoyed more than worried. Martin liked stupid jokes. More than once he had hidden beside the trailer just to make me think something was wrong. So I shouted, "Enough already! Get in the truck!" That's when I heard it. A sound from somewhere ahead and to the right. Not words, not footsteps. A low, painful groan. Human. Like someone trying to call for help with no air left in their chest. I froze. Then I heard it again, shorter this time. "Martin?" No answer. I reached under the seat and grabbed the telescopic steel baton I keep there for emergencies. I'm not proud of carrying it, but drivers know why we do. I also took my larger flashlight from the door pocket and stepped down from the cab. The cold hit me hard. Outside, the fog was even worse. The truck's hazard lights were visible, but only as dull orange flashes reflecting off the whiteness. I could barely see the front bumper. "Martin!" I shouted again. This time I heard something that sounded like movement in the weeds, to the right of the shoulder, where the fence line should have been. I angled the flashlight down and started walking carefully. At first the ground felt normal, packed dirt and gravel near the shoulder. Then one more step and my right boot sank into soft mud up to the ankle. I cursed and pulled it free. That was strange. That roadside was usually dry, especially in winter. I shined the light farther and saw only fog and some thin brush. I took another step. Both boots went in. Mud. Thick, sticky, black. "Martin, answer me." No answer. Then from farther ahead, I heard him. I am sure I heard him. "Rafa." His voice sounded weak and far away. "I'm here," I yelled back. "Stay there." I kept moving forward, pushing through brush I could not clearly see. The mud got deeper with every step. In less than half a minute, I was in water up to my shins. Cold water. I stopped dead. There should not have been water there. Not like that. A ditch maybe. A puddle, but this was deeper and it stretched farther than my flashlight could penetrate through the fog. I turned to look back at the truck and I couldn't see it, and not the hazards, not the headlights, nothing. That was impossible. I had walked maybe 10 or 12 meters, no more. I felt the first real wave of fear right there, not because of the water, but because the truck had disappeared from sight in a place where I should still have been able to see the glow. I started backing up. "Martin, talk to me." Then I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. A child crying. Very close. It was not loud. It sounded like a little kid trying not to sob, holding back tears and failing, short breaths, wet crying, somewhere to my left. I swung the flashlight toward it. Nothing but fog and black water. The crying moved. A second later it sounded ahead of me, then behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. The beam cut through white vapor and hit the surface of the water, where small bubbles were rising in clusters, dozens of them, then more, like something was breathing under the mud. I took a step back and my boot stuck hard. I yanked it free with effort. "Who's there?" I shouted. "Who's crying?" No answer. Just that crying, now softer, and then Martin's voice again in the distance. "Rafa, over here, hurry!" I went toward Martin's voice. What else was I going to do? I thought he was hurt. The water kept rising, knee level, thigh level. I lifted the baton and flashlight higher. My legs were numbing from the cold. The mud under the water felt alive somehow, shifting and pulling at my boots. Then something brushed my left calf. I jumped and turned. At first I thought it was reeds or plastic caught in the water. Then it brushed me again, slow, deliberate, slick like wet skin. I started moving faster. The crying stopped. The silence was worse. A second later, something closed around my leg just above the knee. I swear on my family this is true, it felt like a hand. Not a claw, not a branch, a hand, cold, strong fingers squeezing through my jeans. I screamed and swung the baton downward into the water. I felt resistance, then nothing. In the same motion, I lost balance and dropped to one knee. My flashlight hand went under for half a second. When I pulled it out, the beam flickered. I forced myself up, shaking so hard I could barely breathe, and pushed forward in the direction where I thought I had heard Martin. The water reached my waist, then my stomach. Then I took one more step and found no ground. I went under up to my chest and started paddling, holding the flashlight over my head. The cold hit like a punch. My lungs tightened. I swallowed water that tasted like rust and dirt. I'm a decent swimmer, but not with boots and winter clothes. I kicked and moved forward anyway. "Martin!" I yelled. What answered me was his voice, but wrong. Same tone, same words, too far away, too calm. "Come here, Rafa." Not shouting, not panicked, just calling me. I stopped swimming and listened. The voice came from ahead, then from my right, then from somewhere almost next to my ear, whispering my name. The flashlight died, completely black. I have been in blackouts before. I have driven mountain roads at night with no moon. This was different. This darkness felt close, like a hood over my head. I couldn't tell sky from water. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open. I kept one hand above the surface, holding the useless flashlight, the other moving to stay afloat. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably. I remember thinking very clearly, I'm going to drown in a place that shouldn't exist. Then I heard splashing behind me. Fast splashing, coming toward me. I tried to turn, but something wrapped around my right boot and tugged. I kicked hard and felt it slip away. I started swimming blindly, not knowing where I was going, just desperate to get away from whatever was in that water. I don't know how long that lasted. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. In panic, time breaks apart. My arms started cramping, my shoulders burned, my hands lost strength from the cold. I swallowed more water and coughed so hard I thought I'd pass out. I remember crying out for God, for my wife, for anyone. I remember hearing that child again, close enough that it sounded like crying right at my chest. Then suddenly, my boots touched something solid. Gravel. I stumbled upright, bent over, coughing. The water dropped from chest level to my knees in 2 steps, then to my ankles. A light appeared ahead, real light, white and steady. "Rafa!" This time it was Martin, truly Martin. I pushed toward it and came out onto the shoulder of the road, dropping to my hands. I was gasping, shaking, exhausted. My chest hurt from the cold. I expected water to pour off me onto the dirt. Martin grabbed my arm and tried to lift me. "Where were you?" he said. "I've been looking everywhere." I could barely speak. "There's water. I fell in. There's something there." He stared at me with a face I'll never forget, concern mixed with confusion. "What water?" "The ditch, the swamp, whatever this is." I pointed into the fog. "I went in after you. I couldn't find the truck. Something grabbed me." Martin turned and shined his flashlight toward the place I had come from. I grabbed his jacket. "Don't go." But he pulled free and took a few steps, sweeping the beam slowly over the ground. Then he came back. "Rafa, there's no water there." I got angry then, terrified and angry. "What are you talking about? I was swimming." He shined the light on me. And that's when my stomach dropped. My clothes were dry. Not damp, not drying, dry. My jeans had dust on the knees from where I'd fallen on the shoulder. My jacket was cold, yes, but dry. My sleeves were dry. Even my boots, dirty but not wet. No mud dripping, no water trail, nothing. I touched my chest, my arms, my pants like a madman. I could still feel cold in my bones. I could still feel the pressure in my lungs from swallowing water. My right knee ached where I'd gone under. My leg burned where that thing had grabbed me. But my clothes were dry. Martin kept asking me questions. Where had I gone? How far? Why didn't I answer him? I told him everything right there in broken pieces. The water, the crying child, his voice calling me, the hand, the swimming. He listened, but I could see he didn't know what to believe. Then he told me his side. He had gone only a few meters off the road to relieve himself and check one of the straps. He said the fog was so thick he used the trailer as reference and came back fast. When he returned to the passenger side, I was gone. The driver door was open. The baton was missing. My flashlight was gone. He thought maybe I had gone looking for him as a joke. Then he started hearing me shout. But according to him, my voice sounded far away, much farther than it should have. He said he walked around the truck calling my name, and every time he thought he was getting closer, my voice came from another direction. He never saw water, only dry weeds, fence posts, and packed dirt. He said at one point he even walked 20 or 30 meters into the field and his boots never got wet. Finally, he saw me emerge through the fog from the right side, stumbling and coughing like I'd run a marathon. I asked him about my flashlight and baton. We searched for a minute or two near the shoulder but couldn't find either. I did not want to search longer. Neither did he, even if he wouldn't admit it. His jokes were gone by then. We got back in the truck and left. Neither of us talked much for the next hour. The radio came back after maybe 10 kilometers. Signal returned to my phone. I had 2 missed calls from my wife. Nothing strange there. Everything started behaving normally again, which somehow made it worse. I wanted something to stay wrong so I could prove to myself that what happened had happened. When we stopped at a gas station later, I went straight to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall. I took off my jeans and checked my right leg. There were marks. 4 dark bruises above the knee, spaced like fingers. I showed Martin. He stared at them for a long time and said nothing. For weeks after that, I avoided that route. When dispatch insisted because it was the fastest path for a return trip, Martin and I both agreed to take it only in daylight. About a month later, we passed through the same section around noon. No fog, clear sky, harsh sun. We pulled over on the shoulder. Same flat fields, same fencing, same dry grass. No swamp, no pond, no deep ditch. There was a shallow irrigation trench farther off, but nowhere near deep enough for a man to sink, much less swim. Certainly not where I had gone in. We walked the area together in silence. The ground was hard and dusty. Martin even stamped his boots and said, "You see? Nothing." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. My throat felt tight. The place looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Before leaving, I noticed something I hadn't seen at night. An old concrete marker half hidden near the fence line, broken and tilted. Most of the paint was gone, but there were still a few letters and a year I could barely read. I couldn't make out everything, but I'm almost sure it mentioned a flood channel and a closure from decades ago. I have no proof of what I lived that night. I know how that sounds. If someone else told me the same story years ago, I would probably say the fog confused him, that panic and cold made him imagine things. But imagination doesn't leave bruises shaped like fingers. And imagination doesn't make you feel even now that some places on the road are not always what they seem. That's the part I can't explain, Mr. Williams. I think there are stretches of highway that keep memories in the ground. Old accidents, old watercourses, buried things. Maybe when the conditions are right, cold, fog, silence, those places show you what used to be there, or what happened there, or what still wants to be found. Sometimes I wonder if there really was a child once. Maybe someone drowned there when that flood channel was still open. Maybe the road was built over something it shouldn't have been built over. Maybe I followed a voice that wasn't Martin's because whatever was there needed me to step farther in. Or maybe it just wanted company. I still drive, I still work nights. This job feeds my family and fear doesn't pay bills, but there are two things I never do anymore. I don't stop in heavy fog unless there are other vehicles nearby. And if someone calls my name from the dark, I make sure I can see their face before I take even one step. Thank you for reading this, Mr. Williams. If you decide to share my story on your channel, you can use my name or leave it anonymous. I only ask that you tell your listeners this much. On the road, not every detour is marked, and not every place that looks dry is truly empty. Mr. Williams, you told me last Thursday after I turned in my resignation that you couldn't understand what had happened to me. You said I was your most reliable driver. 22 years, not a single late delivery, not a single complaint. And then one morning I just walked into your office and quit without giving you 2 weeks. You deserved an explanation then, and I didn't have the words for it. I hope I do now. I'm going to tell you everything that happened in that house. And I'm going to ask you, with all the respect I have for you after more than 2 decades, to please read this to the end before you decide I've lost my mind. I bought the house on Crestfall Drive in the spring of 2019, the year my daughter Lauren turned 9. My wife Donna had been patient with me through 6 years of renting. 6 years of landlords who raised the rent every January and neighbors whose dogs barked all night. When we finally signed the papers on that place, she cried right there in the lawyer's office, not sad crying, the other kind. It was a 2-story colonial on a 1/4 acre, yellow siding, black shutters, a back porch that overlooked a stretch of pine trees. Old house, built in the early 60s, but solid. Good bones, the realtor kept saying, and she wasn't wrong. Previous owner had been an elderly man named Hargrove who had lived there alone for the last 11 years of his life. He'd passed away the previous winter, not in the house, but in a care facility about 15 miles away. His daughter handled the estate sale and seemed eager, maybe a little too eager to be done with the whole thing. But I didn't think much of it at the time. People grieve differently. We moved in that April. For 2 full years it was everything we'd wanted. Lauren learned to ride her bike in that driveway. Donna planted tomatoes along the south fence that actually grew. I'd come home from a long haul. Sometimes I'd been on the road 40 hours straight. And just sitting on that back porch with a beer, listening to the pines, was enough to reset everything. Then the summer of 2021 arrived, and something in that house changed. It started with Lauren. She was 11 by then, and a solid sleeper. Always had been. That girl could fall asleep in the back of the truck on a bumpy road and not wake up until we hit the rest stop. So, when Donna came and found me in the garage one Saturday morning and told me Lauren had woken up screaming at 3 in the morning, I paid attention. I went to Lauren's room and she was sitting up in bed, blanket pulled to her chin, eyes wide open but not entirely there. Donna had already turned on the lamp. I sat on the edge of the mattress and asked her what had happened. She said a woman had been standing at the foot of her bed. "What kind of woman?" I asked. Lauren thought about it for a moment, the way kids do when they are trying to describe something they don't have words for yet. Then she said, "A wet woman, Daddy. She was all wet, her hair was stuck to her face and she was just standing there looking at me. She wasn't blinking." I told her it was a dream. Donna shot me a look over Lauren's head that said, "Be careful," and I softened my voice and said that sometimes our brains make up very real-looking things when we're sleeping, and that the woman was gone now and everything was fine. Lauren didn't look convinced, but she let us tuck her back in, and eventually she fell asleep. Donna and I stood in the hallway and whispered to each other for about 10 minutes. Donna wanted to bring Lauren into our bed for the rest of the night. I thought that would just reinforce the fear, make it a habit. We disagreed quietly, the way married people do, and in the end Lauren stayed in her own room and we both spent the rest of the night barely sleeping. The next morning Lauren seemed fine. She ate her cereal, watched TV, asked if we could go to the pool. Kids are resilient like that. I almost convinced myself it was over. It wasn't over. The following week I had a long haul scheduled. The overnight run up to the distribution center outside of Harrisburg, which meant I'd be leaving at 11 at night and wouldn't be back until the following afternoon. I'd done that route hundreds of times. It's a straight shot up the interstate, flat terrain, easy driving. I actually liked it because the traffic was almost nothing and you could just breathe. I kissed Donna and Lauren goodnight and pulled out of the driveway at 11:15. The night was clear. I had the radio on low and I was thinking about the new tires I'd been meaning to put on the truck and whether I should do it before or after the scheduled maintenance in September. Around 1 in the morning, about 60 miles north of home, my phone buzzed on the dash mount. It was Donna. I hesitated. She knew I didn't like to talk while driving, but something made me answer. Her voice was very quiet. That's what hit me first. Donna is not a quiet person. She has a big laugh and she talks with her hands, and when she's upset about something, you know it. This quiet voice didn't belong to her. There's someone in the house, she whispered. I felt the road disappear from under the tires for just a second, the way it does when your brain stops processing sensory information because all of it is going somewhere else. What do you mean? I said. Did you call 911? It's not... She paused. It's not that kind of someone. I asked her what she meant by that. She told me that she'd gotten up to get a glass of water and had come down the stairs to find the kitchen light on. She was certain she hadn't left it on. She stood at the bottom of the stairs looking into the kitchen, and through the doorway she could see a shape sitting at the kitchen table, sitting very still, just sitting there. I turned the hall light on, she said, and it was gone, but the chair was pulled out from the table. It hadn't been like that when we ate dinner. I told her to take Lauren and go to her sister's place. She said Lauren was still asleep and she didn't want to wake her. I told her to wake her anyway. She said she was fine, she just wanted to hear my voice. We stayed on the phone for almost 40 minutes. By the time we hung up, the sky was starting to lighten in the east and Donna sounded more like herself. She said she was going to make some coffee and that she was sure it had been a trick of the light, a shadow, her own tired brain. I let her have that explanation. I needed it too. But when I came home the next afternoon and walked into the kitchen, I looked at the chairs around the table. I am a precise man, Mr. Williams. You know that about me. I notice details. I've been driving professionally for 22 years and I've never once misjudged a dock approach. I know where things are, and I knew standing there in my kitchen looking at those chairs that one of them was not where it belonged. I want to be straight with you about something. I am not a man who believes in ghosts. I grew up Catholic, went to Mass every Sunday until I was about 25, and then life got in the way and I sort of drifted. But even at my most devout, I understood the supernatural as a category of faith, something you held quietly inside yourself, not something that pulled out your kitchen chairs in the middle of the night. I started looking for rational explanations. I checked the house for drafts that could move lightweight furniture. I looked for evidence of an animal getting in through the crawl space. A raccoon maybe, or something bigger. I went through the house top to bottom, opening every closet, pulling everything away from the walls in the basement. Nothing. I called the previous owner's daughter. I told her I was doing some renovation and wanted to know if there were any structural quirks I should be aware of. I framed it that way on purpose. She was polite and brisk and said she really wasn't the right person to ask because she hadn't spent much time in the house. Then right as we were about to hang up, she paused. Is everything okay over there? She asked. Fine, I said. Why? Another pause. My father. Toward the end, before we moved him to the facility. He used to call me sometimes at night. He'd say there was a woman in the house, walking around. He said she was wet, like she'd just come in from the rain. She laughed, but it wasn't a comfortable laugh. He was 87 and his mind was going. I told myself it was the dementia. I thanked her and got off the phone. Lauren had described a wet woman standing at the foot of her bed. I sat with that for a long time. Things got worse through August and into September. Lauren started refusing to sleep in her room. She'd fall asleep on the couch watching TV and we'd carry her up, but she always ended up back downstairs by morning, sometimes in ways that she said she couldn't explain. She'd wake on the couch with no memory of walking down. Donna started finding doors open that she'd closed, not just interior doors. The back door once, which I was sure I'd deadbolted. The basement door twice. I'm a methodical person. I started keeping a log, date, time, what was found, what the weather was like, who was home. I bought a small notebook and kept it in my work bag. I read it back now and it sounds insane, but at the time it felt like the most rational thing I could do. Like if I could gather enough data, an explanation would emerge. The explanation that emerged was not one I was ready for. It was a Wednesday night in late September. I'd done a local run and was home by 8. Lauren was at a sleepover at her friend's house. First one she'd been excited about in weeks, which had lifted everyone's spirits. Donna and I had dinner together, actually talked the way we used to, laughed a couple times. It felt almost normal. I woke up at 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone immediately, the way you do when something wakes you and you're trying to place yourself. The room was dark. Donna was asleep beside me, breathing slow and even. I lay still and tried to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. From downstairs. A sound that I can only describe. And I know how this is going to read, Mr. Williams, but I'm going to describe it accurately. As footsteps that were too heavy to be Donna and too deliberate to be the house settling. Slow, even footsteps crossing the kitchen floor, then stopping. Then starting again, moving toward the stairs. I sat up. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something older than fear, something pre-rational. The thing that stands up in your chest before your brain has finished processing the data. My hands were very steady when I reached over and turned on the bedside lamp, but my heart was going like I'd just come off a sprint. The footsteps had stopped. I got out of bed. I walked to the top of the stairs and looked down into the darkness of the first floor and said, in a voice I worked hard to keep level, "There's nobody in this house who doesn't belong here." The words sounded ridiculous even as I said them, but the house was quiet. I went back to bed. I did not sleep again until nearly 5. I didn't tell Donna about the footsteps. I told myself I was protecting her. Looking back, I think I was protecting myself from having to say out loud that something was happening in that house that I couldn't explain. What I did do was go to the library. I know that sounds strange, but I didn't know where else to start. I wasn't going to search the internet. I'd learned early on that searching for anything unusual yields an avalanche of nonsense that makes it impossible to find anything factual. So I went to the town library on a Tuesday afternoon, when I had a few hours before my next run, and I asked the reference librarian if there were any local history records I could look at, property records, that kind of thing. She was a small woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she didn't ask me why I wanted them, just pointed me to the local history section in the back and told me the older property records were on microfiche. I found the house on Crestfall Drive in records going back to 1962 when it was built. A man named Ellis Hargrove had bought it that year with his wife, a woman named Catherine. I found a brief mention of Catherine Hargrove in a newspaper archive from 1979, a small notice in the local paper, the kind they used to print. She had drowned in a lake house accident during a storm. She was 44 years old. The article said she had been found by her husband the following morning, floating near the dock. It said she was survived by her husband and one daughter. I sat very still in that library chair for a while. Then I drove home and stood in my kitchen and looked at the chair that had been pulled out from the table, and I thought about a woman who had drowned in a lake in 1979 and whose husband had lived in this house for another 40+ years, alone for the last 11 of them. And I thought about what the daughter had said on the phone. He said she was wet, like she'd just come in from the rain. And something settled over me that I can't fully describe. It was not quite terror. It was something quieter and heavier than terror. I understood then that what was in that house had been there a long time. Long before I bought it, long before Donna planted her tomatoes, long before Lauren learned to ride her bike in the driveway. It had been waiting maybe, or it had simply never left. I talked to a priest. I'm not going to tell you which one to protect his privacy, but he's a man I'd known for years, and when I sat down in his office and told him the story, all of it, starting with Lauren and the wet woman at the foot of her bed, he listened without interrupting. He has that quality, the ability to receive a story completely before responding to it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to ask you something honestly, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you think your daughter and your wife are mentally unstable, or do you think they saw what they say they saw? I said I thought they saw what they saw. He nodded. And the footsteps, the doors, the chair. I didn't imagine those, I said. He nodded again. He told me that the church's position on the presence of spirits was nuanced, that not all unexplained presences were demonic, that some were simply what the tradition called restless, souls that had not completed their passage for reasons that were sometimes grief-related, sometimes traumatic. He said that in his 30 years as a priest he had encountered 4 situations that he considered genuinely inexplicable, and that in each of those cases the approach that had brought resolution was not confrontation, but acknowledgement. You're a trucker, he said. You understand the idea of a freight that needs to reach its destination. Yes, I said. Think of it that way, he said. He came to the house the following Saturday. He didn't bring theater. No dramatic rituals, no incense, none of what I half expected. He walked through every room slowly, and in each room he said a brief prayer in a low voice that I couldn't entirely hear. In the kitchen he stood for a long time at the table. He laid one hand gently on the back of that chair, the pulled-out chair, and he said something very quietly, just a few words, and then he pushed it back in, square to the table, and moved on. In Lauren's room he paused at the foot of the bed for perhaps 2 full minutes. His eyes were closed. I stood in the doorway and waited. When he came out he looked somehow lighter, not relieved exactly, more like a man who has carried something and set it down. I think she was simply coming home, he said. Whatever kept her from crossing. I think she's crossed now. I didn't ask him to elaborate. I don't think elaboration would have helped. That night was the first night in weeks that everyone slept through until morning. Lauren came back from her sleepover Sunday afternoon and went up to her room and unpacked her bag without hesitation, without that look she'd had for months when she approached the stairs, that faint tightening around her eyes. Donna made dinner. The kitchen felt like the kitchen again. Just a kitchen. Just a room where people eat, not a place that held its breath. I'm not going to tell you nothing has happened since. Once, about 3 months later, I came downstairs at midnight for a glass of water and felt, briefly, a coldness at the base of the stairs that didn't match the temperature of the rest of the house. I stood still in it for a moment. It wasn't threatening. If anything, it felt like the last faint trace of something that was mostly gone. I said quietly into the darkness, "You can go. You've been here long enough." The call lifted. I poured my water and went back to bed. So that's why I quit, Mr. Williams. Not because of the house. The house is fine now, better than fine. But because of what those months did to the way I see a long road at night. There's something about driving at 2 a.m, 60 miles from home, watching the white lines come at you out of the dark, that used to feel like freedom. I loved it, you know I loved it. 22 years of overnight runs, and I never once called in sick because of fatigue, never once asked to be taken off a difficult route. But now, on those long stretches of highway in the dark, I find myself thinking about things that don't let go. About a woman who drowned in a lake and came home wet, still looking for something. About a chair pulled out from a table. About my daughter's face in the lamplight, blanket to her chin, trying to describe a thing she had no words for. I need the daylight now, Mr. Williams. I need to drive when I can see what's coming. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this when I walked into your office. I hope it explains things at least a little. You were good to me for a long time and I wanted you to understand. With respect, Daniel F. Caruso driver, retired Crestfall driver.